Alrighty, and we're on. So I'm here at Customised Fitness Solutions, and I'm sitting with Jon Lethal Leven. Yes, how are you?
Very good, and yourself?
I'm good. So, funnily enough, so we were talking, just a little bit before about martial arts backgrounds and things like that. So, you used to train with Chukfai at Jimukun.
That's right. Jimukun's my background, my traditional background. It's something I've been training since I was 15, and I have the tattoo on my chest, which I asked Chukfai whether I could get at the time when I was a bit older, naturally. But it's that close to my heart that I believe and love that system that Chukfai was able to allow me to learn.
And so we'll get into the martial arts journey, but I want to I always like to bring it back to sort of help people to understand, where you grew up and how you grew up and that sort of thing. So where did you grow up?
So I actually a Shire boy.
Yep. I
was born in Sutherland Hospital, so nice and close. I have lived away from the Shire, so don't get the impression that I've just stuck myself in the Shire. I've grown up just down at Sutherland, went to school at Sutherland Public School, and high school was Janali Boys, which was actually quite a rough school. It has a bit of a reputation for being a fairly rough school, and was probably one of the instrumental things in encouraging me to learn how to fight quite well. So it was a good place to grow up, but it was a hard place at the same time. So
when you say, Janali was a bit of a rough school, like what were some of the things that would happen?
For instance, in year 7 when I was there was a large, for want of a better term, brawl on the soccer oval just opposite, which they had bats and cricket bats and baseball bats and bits of sticks and rope and all that type of stuff being swung and hit at each other. So it was a fairly violent environment.
It's always funny when I sort of reflect back on these things. 'Cause I don't know whether schools are much different. I guess it depends on the area, right?
Yes.
But I remember when I first got to high school, we used to have like this. I think it was called like a gala day, and so it was like our school, Borkham Hills, used to go to, whether it was we would go to Crestwood High School or Crestwood would come to our school.
Yep.
And I think our year was the last year that they ever did the gala day because this massive brawl erupted. Yep. And it started with like, at the start, it was just people just throwing like fruit and tin cans and whatever else and blah, blah, blah. And then it just erupted into this massive brawl. And it was funny because like, I can laugh about it now because, when some of the teachers tried to intervene, like some of the kids from that school would start trying to beat up on the teacher.
Yep.
And, it was chaos, right? Like when you think about it and you go, like, how do we get away with this stuff?
How we got away with this beyond me. Like literally every lunch hour there was a fruit fight. At Janelli, and it was just a free for all. And again, you had to survive. If you didn't try and make a stand for it, I got a bit of a reputation fairly early on so people didn't really muck around with me. But that was simply because I did some training and knocked a kid out in year 7, and then from then on, for the next couple of years, I was pretty safe. No one wanted to pick on me because they knew I could handle myself.
So then, okay, let's go back even further, right? So I guess, growing up in the Shire, like what are some of the things that you remember, whether it's, from your household or from, happy times growing up in that area?
Yes, certainly. We had quite a good upbringing overall. I didn't spend a lot of time. My father was a very busy man. So he was always working.
What did he do?
He was actually a truck driver. So a little bit of background about that is that he left school in year 9 because his father ran a trucking business, but his father had an accident, and my dad had to step up and take over the family business until his father was good enough to work again. So he just kept working. So that's all my dad really knew. He knew how to work hard, and that's something which I suppose is instilled in myself as well, in that I know I have to work hard to get anywhere. So even though my father wasn't highly educated, he tried his best at everything he did, and he worked very hard. He was also one of the top dog handlers in Australia, so training dogs.
Okay.
The reason why I mention this is because I train people.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of similarities in what I do to what my father did. So I could say that's probably something that's crossed over as well.
What kind of dogs?
So he used to train German Shepherds.
Okay.
So we'd get dogs brought in from Germany. People would buy dogs over in Germany, bring them to my father, and my father would train them, which meant that we had to understand a few German words because the dogs don't know English.
Yep.
So we had to learn a few there just to keep them under control. And these are... back in the 80s, you're looking at dogs that are worth, $80,000, $100,000 at that time. It was a
Wow.
big investment for some people, and they would just give them to my father to train.
And were these dogs being used for like police work or?
No, these were actually purebred show dogs and obedience dogs. So dogs being able that would perform on the show fields and also in obedience work. My father, back then the police didn't have a big dog presence, and my father would regularly use some of his dogs for tracking and so forth involved if the police required. But he didn't actually like to do a lot of work with the police back then because their dog program wasn't that developed. And they didn't treat the dogs as well as what he wanted them to be treated, so to speak. So he did have some ethics in that regard, which was good. But yeah, so that was a bit about my father, and he didn't spend a lot of time with me in relation to my soccer or sports or cricket or martial arts. Because he was always very busy with work, and the dogs were a big part of his life. So my mum did a fantastic job of raising myself and my brother. I've got a younger brother, and she's put a lot of love and care into us to help us get through things. And it was we weren't a wealthy household. My father had to work hard, but at the same time he did provide very well for us. So I can't say we didn't get anything.
Yep.
The Shire was very different in that was late 70s, early 80s. There was very few developments. I remember my fond memories. I used to love riding my BMX around or ride billy cart down the street, stuff like that. And you had the ability to do that. The roads weren't too crowded.
Yep.
When I started going to my martial arts training, it was like 6:30 at Como, which was about 3 kilometres away. I jump on my BMX, no helmet, no lights, no reflectors, ride to training, come home again at about 8 o'clock, whatever it was, no lights, no nothing. It's just what we did back then. You could do that.
Yep.
So I really enjoyed the fact that as a kid I got to explore, had the Royal National Park at my back door as well, so you could ride around there, just riding around the streets on my bike and little back laneways, alleyways, having a bit of fun, chasing mates around with their bikes and stuff like that. And then got a bit older, started skateboarding as well, and kept going from there, having fun.
So what's the age difference between you and your brother?
There's 3 years between us.
Okay.
So he's a little bit younger. My brother's actually a very competitive person, which I suppose is why I'm a competitive person as well. He's actually a multiple Australian jet ski champion, so he races jet skis at the top level. And he's done very well with that. We had to change doing the same sports at a fairly young age because we were so competitive. We'd end up nearly killing each other. So I did train him in martial arts for a little while, and he's good offensive. His defense needs some work, but we'll talk about that.
He's probably busy trying to take your head off to one up you, right?
Exactly. He's always trying to get me. But typical older younger brother sibling relationship. He was always trying to beat me in everything he could do.
Yep.
And I was certainly a competitive person as well. So
yeah, it's funny. I'm actually seeing that with my kids at the moment. So my eldest Cadence and Harley, they will always. Okay, I think probably Harley's the common link. He'll fight with any sibling, right? Even his little sister. Yep. But it's like, I think, so as an example, it would be like, so Cadence might say, I'm going to go toilet. He'll just bolt to the toilet to get there first to beat her to the toilet. Yep. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? There's like a second toilet. Like, just go to the other toilet. Like, why do you have to rush to beat her to that one toilet? But it's just like these little things. And I was like, I was saying to my wife this morning, I was like, maybe I should try and get Cadence to say something like, I'm going to eat breakfast, and see if he rushes to eat breakfast first, right? Yes. Because, until there's a competition element involved, it's like he could be like the laziest person in the world. Yep. It'll be like, I don't want to, like, I'll be like, can you clean up this mess? Nah, I'm tired. Yep. I'm this, I'm that. And then it's like, okay, Cadence, can you clean? And then he'll start doing it. Like, I'll tell her to do it, and then he'll want to do it. Yep. Or and vice versa. Like, if I tell Harley to do something, then Cadence will want to do it before him. So it's like, Harley, can you turn off the light? And then she'll rush to go and turn the light off first. Yes. And then he'll get upset that he missed out on turning off the light. Yes. It's like, I don't necessarily try and foster any competition between them, but they're naturally trying to find that competitive edge no matter what it is, and it's like, it's just silly things, right? Yes. But they want to compete.
They want it. That's it. As a young age, they're developing it. I suppose that was between my brother and I. I've got 2 children, and one boy, one girl, older boy and a younger girl, and they don't really have the same competitiveness. I noticed that already. Whereas my brother has two boys, and they're both very competitive. Yeah. So I think it's just some kids just have a natural competitiveness about them, and my brother and I certainly did. So we had a good upbringing. He always tried to outbeat me, and I was just bigger than him at the time, so I could beat him. So but again, it's one of the reasons why I got into martial arts was from wanting to protect people. So I had a couple of friends who got bullied in primary school. Wow. And I spent the last 2 weeks of primary school on detention out in front of the principal's office because one of my friends was picking on another kid who was a friend as well, and I ended up fighting my friend. Yeah. Because he was doing the wrong thing, and he shouldn't have been picking on someone. And that's what was instrumental when I went to high school. Again, being a fairly rough school, I thought, well, I should learn some proper skills. And back in the day, Bruce Lee was a bit of inspiration, the icon. And I used to like watching his movies, so I actively went and tried to find some martial arts skills to learn. So where that come from.
I'm sort of curious, you know how, like you mentioned, your dad was very good at training dogs. You know, was there any crossover in terms of how he would try and train you guys at home? Like,
I have no doubt whatsoever because dogs were my dad's life as such. So, and I'll tell you straight up, there is similarities in way humans behave as to the way a dog will behave. So, one of the things, I've had a lot of experience these days, and I've done a lot of door work and dealing with different people and so forth. And people tend to get scared and then they overreact. Now with a dog doesn't bite you unless it's fear, because it has scare. So that's what I see in people as well, is that people get scared and they overreact. They make a rash decision. And one of the things that they used to do with the dogs, and I certainly cross over to what I believe with humans, is that you got to make the dog comfortable. Make the dog comfortable in an uncomfortable environment. And I believe the same thing, in that if you've got a person, a fighter, or just anybody in general, if you can get them comfortable where 99% of other people would be uncomfortable, they're going to be able to make better decisions, a bit more realistic decisions on what's the best path ahead. So.
Absolutely. Okay. So then, going through school, how would your teachers have described you? What kind of kid were you?
I was quiet. I was actually quite a shy, quiet person. I didn't just, I was actually quite good at school, but at the same time, I didn't make stupid decisions from an early age, I suppose. So if I didn't think something was right, I wouldn't do it. Yep. So if my friends were doing something silly, I wasn't the type of person who just followed their lead. I would make my own decision about, that's probably not the right thing to do. Still did some stupid things because you're a young guy. It happens. But I always tried to make a decision which I thought was on the right path. And I suppose that comes from my mother. She always told us, to be a good person, you got to do the right thing. And she was very instrumental in making sure that we weren't making bad decisions in life, because it would look bad on them as well, and I didn't want that to happen. Yeah.
So then, did your mum work as well, or not?
My mum worked on and off. Dad was running his own business, so she was working for him. Yeah. But she also, in my years, she worked as a medical receptionist. She worked as a cleaning lady. In my teen years, she was working at a trailer manufacturing place as their bookkeeper, so forth. She mainly did bookkeeping type working, and then towards the end she was working for Harvey Norman and a few other places like that. She got me a job when I was in high school at the trailer place, and there's a whole heaps of stories about that we can go into. But it was beneficial to have her as a guiding light for myself and my brother as well.
It sounds like she was like the rock for you guys, right?
Definitely. So she was able to keep us focused. And again, she worked, so quite often we'd come home from school and there would be no one home. But she'd have, us set, so we'd get some food. We were quite independent. Back in those days, kids were very independent. Yeah. We did have to survive, without parental guidance all the time. And I think that's something that's missing a little bit these days. But we've got to try and balance it. I think that we probably didn't have enough guidance, and now we've probably got too much. So.
Yeah. I put that down to, so like even with my parents, right? So my parents migrated to Australia, and then they were always working. Like they had their own businesses. I think my mum at the time, she was running she had a computer shop, like selling computer parts and things like that, and computers. Nice. And then eventually she changed into real estate, and my dad was an accountant through and through. And so like, you know, that when basically, once I got to high school, it was like almost like every day I'd just walk home by myself. And, you know, there's a few times where I'd forgotten the house keys. And so I worked out some ingenious ways to actually break into my own house. And there was plenty of failed times too. Like, you know, like so in our garage, there was like these windows at the top of the garage, like at the top of the garage that you could reach from the backyard. And I used to jump in from the back fence. And so what I worked out as my fail safe was that I'd leave one of the windows just to like, so that it wasn't clipped in, so that I could hop through the window and get into the garage if I needed to. And then, you know, sometimes the garage door would be unlocked and sometimes it wouldn't be. And if it was locked, then I'd be looking for tools. And I'd find like a screwdriver and I'd find like a bit of wire, and I'd pick the lock and get into the house. And then
Smart.
Like you work out all these things, right?
You have to.
And then, but then there were times where it was like, because I'd done that so many times, like I didn't put the screwdriver back, or I didn't put the wire back. And so I had nothing. I was like,
you got to learn.
I'm in the backyard until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, waiting for them to come home. You know, there was once it was like I was busting for the loo. I had to take a crap in the backyard. And then I had to bury it, and I was like, oh, this is horrible, right? Like,
embarrassing, yes.
So, but you learn the lesson, right?
You learn. That's the thing. It's actually about that. We couldn't break into my parents' place. It had deadlocks and bolts on every window, every door, but we had German Shepherds, so we had the dogs in the backyard. So
we had a German Shepherd too, and that wasn't fun to try and take a dump when there's a Shepherd running around
because they're nosy. They're very inquisitive dogs. They want to know everything. But because of that, we had a shed which was away from the house. We could leave a set of keys in there. Because no one was going in the backyard. Simple as that.
The dogs are there.
The dogs were there, and the dogs were notorious for protecting their area very well. We had delivery people turn up, and one of them stepped into the backyard once, and he got bailed up against a fence, and the dogs just kept him there for 4 hours. So he didn't get hurt. The dogs won't bite you unless they were told to bite, because they were well trained. But they would stop you from moving. Because they're threatening. So we used to go get the keys out of the shed and go open the door up. It was okay, but other than that, you could never get anywhere. My phone.
That's right.
But yes, it's you learn as a young man. You had to learn back then to be self-sufficient. As you're aware, you had to learn to put your tools back if you used them. You got to develop that. But that was something which, you know, was good, that we had our own time. My brother and I had our own time. And again, I used to enjoy the martial arts side of things. So reading and looking at what I could find.
So you mentioned that your mum got you a job when you're still in high school, so at the trailer place.
So
let's talk a little bit about that. So that was your first working experience?
I had a paper run before that. But cars and BMX bikes with baskets on the front throwing papers out of them didn't really go well together, and I got hit twice whilst I was doing that paper run.
What, by cars?
Yep. I went over a few bonnets and stuff like that. I've actually been hit by cars 5 times in my life, in that... because I was actually a semi-pro cyclist for a little while. So I was doing a lot of riding. That was before I turned to martial arts as more of a devotion. And I was racing mountain bikes predominantly. But back to the story, I got hit by a couple of cars delivering. On the second time I got hit, Mum said, look, I'm going to get you a job at the factory she was working at, which was actually just down the road here at Kirrawee. And what my job was to do was the factory built trailers for the cars. And myself and a couple of other boys were employed to put the wiring in the trailers and put the lights and the plugs on. So just the electrical side of things. Now, give you a bit of history here. This is early 80s. Workplace safety didn't exist at all. The factory was just dirty, dusty. The spray painting booth used to catch on fire maybe once every month to every 2 months at the most. It'd be on fire. We'd have to get the fire extinguishers out, put it out. The spray painter himself, we used to call him Hypo, because he didn't wear his mask when he'd spray paint, and he was just high on drugs the whole time from the paint. Yeah. We'd get the trailers. I've witnessed fingers being chopped off, people getting grinding cuts, all these funny things that would happen in a factory back then. And we're 13, 14-year-old boys. They would leave us in the factory. So they would finish work at 4, and the trailers would be finished painting at 4, but these trailers had to be ready for the next day. So they would just leave 2 or 3 of us at the factory, tell us to lock up. I was there till like 8 o'clock some nights.
What, fitting lights and...
Just turn the lights off and lock the front gate and walk out. And then, like, you're 13, 14-year-old boys in a whole factory, which is just chaos anyway. Yeah. That's what we would employed to do. Funny story with this is that, again, we're 13, 14 years old, and we used to get paid by the trailer. So the more trailers you did, the more money you could make. Now, there was 3 of us who were very quick. We could do trailers at a really quick rate. Anyone who knew turned up, well, they couldn't keep up with us, so they would only make small money and we'd make the big money. So they would quit eventually. So the 3 of us were very good at what we did, and were very competitive. And we decided that we wanted more money. Yeah. So the 3 of us went on strike. 2 14-year-olds and a 15-year-old went on strike. I was one of the 14s, and we decided we wanted 50 cents extra per trailer. Not a lot. Give us each about an extra $15, $20 a week in our pocket. That's about it. And the boss said no.
Oh, wow.
So we went, well, we're going on strike till we get more money. So about a week and a half went by. My mum's come and see me, and she says, they want to have a chat to you at the factory about coming back to work. I said, sweet, what are they going to do? They're going to let us get the money we want? They said, yes, they are. So we've got back to the factory, and like, this factory used to turn out probably 10 to 15 trailers a day. And it's been a week and a half, so there's like nearly 100 trailers sitting in this factory, which are just unwired. They had some of their full-time workers try and do it, and they were just too slow. And then they tried to get new guys in, and they were just all too slow, and they just eventually just gave up. So at 14 years old, we decided that we were going to go on strike, and we won. Yeah. We got paid extra money. They basically gave us what we want. And they came back, and we had to do all the trailers as quick as possible. Yeah,
well, now there's 100 of them sitting there.
That's right. We made some money. It was good. But it was an interesting story. But, that was an entertaining place to work at a young age. I just ride there on my BMX after school, do the work, and then I'd head home. And some nights it was later than others, but I'd try and make sure that I was out of there by 6 o'clock most times, and then I have time to get to training and do the other things I want to do, and school work naturally as well.
Yeah. That's an interesting story from the perspective of, like, it's that balance of power, right? Like, who holds the balance of power? Is it the people that own the business, or is it the workers that actually do the work?
That's right.
And there's a very precarious tipping point when, if all your workers decide, hey, we're not going to do anything, well, yeah, like, you're going to have to concede on something or come to some sort of agreement to actually be able to keep going.
That's exactly right. And that's something which, I'm a big believer in standing up for the rights of you as a worker. Having said that, I've never been in a union. I've never joined a union. But I believe in doing what's right. If I was working for someone, then I'm getting paid by that person to do the job that they want me to do, but they've got to pay me appropriately. Yeah. So when I left school, I went into finance. I was actually in banking finance for 12 years. A bit strange. I've got lots of stories there. Yep. But one of the things that finance companies were starting to do with the banks and so forth is that they'd like you to overwork. They'd like you to stay back later. And I would just say, well, I'm paid from X to Y. I do my job very well. And I did. I used to win a few awards, and I'd always work hard. Again, my father had instilled in me, work hard. That was the thing. In the first 10 years of working for the bank, I had 9 sick days. So, like, I didn't take days off. I didn't get sick. I didn't do anything. But I always worked hard. But at the same time, if you were to come and say, oh, look, we've got to do a couple of extra hours work today, it's like, why? Yeah. Because so-and-so's not working hard. Well, maybe you need to talk to them about working better. Yeah. Because I'm doing my job really well. And that was something which, I'm very big on making sure that you don't overwork. And then when I started moving down the path of becoming a martial arts instructor, I used to work for a gym who you know, I teach 14 hours a week for them, and they weren't paying me at all. There was a few things there, and that's something which made me want to go, well, I don't need to be here. I can start my own place eventually. And that's something which, you know, again, I have a big belief that pay a person what they're worth. Don't expect more from them unless you're going to pay them more, but also expect them to give you a genuine
output
return.
as well. Yeah, that's
right. So I'm a big believer in that. Today's society is a little bit different. I think people don't quite have that same work ethic. It's a bit different.
Yeah, it's look, I don't know exactly how to word it, because, you know, for me, I was very much on that vein when I first started working. I was putting in whatever I could. But I was probably more to the opposite extreme of, like, so, you know, there's periods of time when I got a promotion as an example, and then I'd be there from start to finish. You know, first one in, last one to leave, 7 days a week, you know, putting in the hours like that. And then, you know, there's only so long that you can continue that for.
That's right.
Until you, like, I used to actually, what would happen was that anytime I would have time off, so whether it was like, even just say going away to a work conference, right? The first day of the work conference would be great. I'd be perfect. The next day, I'd get horrendously ill.
Okay.
And it would just be the nervous system just... No, not anxiety. It's just because I'd just pushed through and, you know, always had that, you know, that fighting mode activated and pushing. It's like the body goes, oh, we can have a rest. So then it's like, you know, everything shuts down. Immune system just gives up. And then it's like all those things that I just sort of pushed aside for that period of time would just come back, and I'd just have the worst flu or the worst cold. And I'd just be like, oh, this sucks. Like, you know, why take a holiday if all that's going to happen is the first week of my holiday, I'm crook as a dog. Because that's literally how it felt. Every time I would take time off, I'd just be sick. And it took me ages to realize that, you know, what was happening. It was just that, when I was in that work mode, I was working, non-stop working and training and doing everything else, and not giving myself any time to sort of, you know, wind down. That any time that I would have a chance to sort of take a bit of a break, my body would just give out and say, hey, okay, all those, you know, whatever we fended off for the last 6 months, but you're going to have more now.
Yeah, we've been saving them for you. You missed out.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't want you to miss out there. No, but that's a challenging thing for people to understand, is that you've got to listen to your body. And you can't overwork it. And that's something I do say to you know, members here at the gym and so forth, is that, you know, put yourself first. It is, yes, you're being paid to do an honest way, you know, day's work, but at the same time, put yourself first, you know, and you've got to look after yourself, because if you're operating at 100%, you can give them 80% and still be successful. But if you're only operating at 60%, you can give them 60%, which drains you completely, but still less than what
they want anyway.
They want, So
it's the adage of consistency over intensity.
That's right.
You know, and I only learned that later on in life, where it was like, okay, you can work at a really intense rate, and maybe you'll see massive gains as a result of it. And we see this all the time with martial artists, right? So people will join the gym and they go, oh, I love this. I want to be X, Y, Z. And then they're in the gym nonstop, you know, 5 to 7 times a week. And they do that for a really short period of time, just however long their motivation is there for. And then, you know, after that first year, like a whole bunch of them will drop off.
Very much so.
And this is the thing, like they go so hard at the beginning, thinking that, oh, this is what they want. But they're thinking about it from that perspective, oh, like I need to make it in the next year or the next 2 years.
Short terms.
Right? They're not thinking about it from the perspective of, okay, you know, how old am I? You know, what's my goal here? So if I've got, you know, 10, 15 years to do this, well, I need to make sure that I can do this consistently for 10, 15 years, right?
That's exactly right.
And then, you know, the outcome that you'll get is going to be maximized versus you go there, you smash it out for 1 year and then you're giving up. And so for the next 14 years, you do nothing.
That's right. So, well, it's the old adage, you see a lot of comments in relation to blue belts. You know, people strive in their jiu-jitsu path, they get their blue belt and they disappear. You know, but that applies in so many different aspects of training and martial arts in general. Like, I always see a lot of people coming into the gym who are so pumped and so keen, and they'll tell you they're going to be the next world champion and this, that, and the other. But then, 3 to 6 weeks later, it's like, where are they? What happened? Where are you ringing them up? Like, what's going on? Oh, you know, this has happened or that's happened. And you try and redirect them and re-guide them, but if they've lost that motivation, they've lost it, unfortunately. And that's a challenge.
That's where it comes down to, you know, how disciplined people are. Right. So, and I'll give you a different analogy here, because I think this is it's an interesting one. So, like, as an example with social media, right? let's say, you know, you want to build up a really big social media following, right? And this is what most people do. They get really into it. They post lots of pictures, videos. They do all this sort of stuff. And they might do it for a month and then they go, I'm not getting anywhere.
Yep.
Right? And they give up.
Yep.
Right? And then, you know, whereas like if you were just sort of to pull back on a little bit and just consistently, whether it was just you did one post a day, but you did that for an extended period of time, the fact that you continually do that thing will ultimately mean that you're going to get the result anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
And so that applies to almost everything in life. It's like people just focus on this short-term goal and they don't think about it. They think that, you know, the position that they're in today is going to be the same position that they're going to be in 5 years. Yep. Whereas if you're consistently working at it and you have a goal that you're trying to achieve, you don't know when it might turn around.
That's exactly it.
But once it turns around, that growth is exponential.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you might be chipping at it for so long, and then it's like, you know, you get that one opportunity and, you know, that fight that you win then leads to a contract with one of the bigger organizations.
Exactly.
You don't know when that's going to happen.
Exactly, yeah.
But you've almost got to work like, you know, work like it's inevitable.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
I always think about it as like, you know, the body of work needs to be there so that it's undeniable.
Yep.
Right? And if the body of work is there and then it becomes undeniable, then at some point, you know, everything else will come.
It happens.
Yeah.
It just happens. That's one of the biggest factors that people forget is that you have to work for a long time to be successful. And a lot of people see the short term, especially on the likes of social media, they see this result and they see it. That hasn't happened overnight.
Yeah.
That's taken years of dedication to get there, you know. And martial arts was something which instilled that in me, and that, you know, to become good, you had to devote a lot of your time to perfecting it. And that's not seen by a lot of people. And as a result, they think it's where's this person come from? They've just appeared out of nowhere. Well, they haven't seen the years of dedication that have gone beforehand. That applies to everything, whether it be martial arts, social media, everything like that. Yeah. So we've got to put in the work. And again, I think that's a big factor for improving your life in general. You should always look to improve. You know, anything you do, find something, make it a little bit better each day. You're going to get better overall.
Yeah, make it a lifestyle choice, right?
That's exactly it.
Like if it's just something that you do versus, okay, this is a discipline that I focus on every single day. And they don't have to be massive things. Like, you know, it could be simple as, you know, being disciplined about your diet, right? It's just saying, okay, rather than umming and ahhing in the morning about what I eat, the first thing I'm going to do is have a protein shake and an XYZ. Or take my vitamins so that I don't think about it, right? Like you just get it out of the way and treat it as you just got to tick the box. Right? And a small thing like that can yield massive changes to people's lifestyle.
Exactly. As you said, ticking the box is something which people don't do enough of. They're too erratic. They're too random. You got to tick things off. Okay, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Moving forward. Once you've got that clear, then you can start a new venture. You know, moving forward is important. Yeah.
So out of curiosity, you know, when you were getting to the end of your high school years, did you have any idea what you wanted to do next? Because you mentioned the finance thing, so I want to sort of get into that. But like, did you have a career direction?
I didn't have a career direction as such. I was actually hoping to move into something like electrical engineering from high school and so forth. But even though I was quite good at school up until about year 10, I was very good. And then I started having a little bit more of a social life. And I'm going to blame the school for this because I was at an all-boys school. It was Janelli boys at the time. Janelli girls was across the road. And in year 11, they announced that they were going to have a co-ed camp. And this co-ed camp was the first of its time that we'd done between the two schools. And we had about 115 boys in year 11, and they had about a similar number of girls. So it was quite a large school, big catchment area back in those days. And they decided to break them into about groups of 8 to 10 boys and 8 to 10 girls. And they asked us to choose a team leader, so to speak, from each little group. And I got chosen as a team leader. Now, what that meant was that we now had to go to meetings at the girls' school, or they'd come to us, and we'd be interacting with them quite regularly. But it also meant that you're one of the more influential people in the school in relation to, you know, activities and stuff that we might be doing. So therefore, you got invited to a lot of parties and stuff like that. So my year 11 was spent probably too much indulging in going out and having a good time, which is what you got to do it. But I didn't quite study enough, and my grades in year 11 and year 12 suffered as a result. So my father, being my father, he said, yeah, I couldn't go to uni because I didn't put the effort into whilst I was at school. It was his words. He wasn't going to pay for me to go to uni if I couldn't get good results. So I had to go get a job, and I'd actually done some work experience for the bank in their IT department, and my godfather actually worked for the bank, so he got me the work experience, and he mentioned that they were coming in for some traineeships after school, and I applied for a traineeship. Apparently I got rejected for the traineeship, but they said I could start work on Monday as a full-time employee, so I took that. But overall, I didn't really have a goal as to what I wanted to do. I just wanted to get out and have a bit of a life. Most of my mates were going to uni, so I knew I had to work. I didn't really have a focus on what type of work. I just wanted to do a good job wherever I wanted. I was playing a lot of soccer back then and starting to do triathlons, and doing a little bit of cycling as well. So my sports was always something that I really enjoyed. Yep. The bank was just something which was going to pay a wage.
Yeah. So okay. Let's digress a little bit. Let's talk about the cycling and that side of things, and then I want to come back to the bank.
Yes.
So where did the interest in cycling and doing all that sort of stuff come from?
So when I was a little kid, as I said, I used to ride around the streets on my BMX. I did a little bit of BMX racing. There was a BMX racetrack at Menai at the day. Did a little bit of that. Wasn't overly good, but I had fun. Soccer was probably the most thing I was focused on at the time. When I got to around down to 19s, I was getting a little bit disenchanted with soccer because the team was very good. We played A grade, but they were also starting to party and enjoy themselves. And I was, being a competitive person, I'd be at training every day and wanting to play hard, and I want to win all the time. And I felt the team was letting me down. So I played a few more years. I actually ended up playing till all age ones, which was about another 4 years of soccer. But during that time, I was getting less and less interested in the success because they were a good team. We just weren't getting the results I felt we deserved. And I looked at a sport that was a bit more individual. And triathlons was just coming around that time, and cycling as well was an add-on from the triathlons. I gave up on the triathlons after about 4 years simply because I hate swimming. So it's like I was a okay swimmer, but just swimming up and down a pool, watching that black line underneath the blue, just got boring. Yeah. And so I was more of a runner cyclist in my build anyway. So I'd do a triathlon, I'd come out back at the pack of the swim, and then I just work my ass off on the bike and in the run to get back up towards the front. I never actually won any events, but I placed okay. But it really instilled in me that the cycling was probably where I needed to be. And I went down a path of racing as a semi-pro in mountain biking, and a lot of fun. Yeah. Mountain biking is great fun. Getting out in the bush, you're getting dirty, you're getting muddy. Bikes are breaking, people are breaking parts on their body every now and then when they crash.
Into a tree.
Yeah, trees. I've got scars all over my body from crashes. It was in the early days of mountain biking as well, so front suspension was only just coming out. And so we were riding all hardtails, front suspension. We had one of our good friends was actually the first Australian sponsored by an American mountain bike team, and that was Miles Davis, and he was sponsored by Trek. He was a big downhill racer. So we used to do downhill, we used to do cross-country, just riding every weekend. And to get fit enough for that, we're doing a lot of road cycling as well.
I see.
And we do the criteriums and racing different things to get that speed in our legs. But we had a great crew. We had about 20 guys, and about 6 or 7 of them were ranked in the top 10 of Australia, and I managed to get there as well. And we had 4 or 5 of us of that group of guys who went to either World Championships or Olympics. So we had a good bunch of guys, and that was a very competitive environment to ride in. We were always pushing each other to become better as a cyclist, and as a result, that certainly crossed over into my martial arts with my fitness levels.
Yeah, cardio.
Yeah, so it was one of the big things, especially when I first started fighting, was I used to be able to go for days at high speed because I just had a really good tank on me from all the training I did from cycling. So it's good benefits.
And then you also mentioned before that, through cycling you get hit by a couple of cars.
Yeah, I've been over the few bonnets of cars, over the roof of one car. I was hit by a driving instructor once.
What?
Driving through Bankstown. I was riding through Bankstown. I was coming home I used to work at Parramatta when I was in finance at one stage.
And so you used to cycle to Parramatta?
I used to cycle to Parramatta, yeah. So
how long would that take you?
I could ride there quicker than I could drive.
Because you just skip all the traffic?
Skip all the traffic. So I was generally by the time I could ride there and shower, I could be at work 5 minutes quicker than what it would take me to drive there.
Wow.
And coming home was a different matter. I could drive home about 10, 15 minutes quicker than what I could ride.
Okay.
Because the ride, you're just consistent. You're just moving at a consistent pace. But I was coming home one afternoon and nicely well lit up. It was daylight saving, so that it wasn't dark or anything like that. Coming through Bankstown and had a driving instructor car turn across in front of me. So I've actually gone over his bonnet, across his windshield and into the garden of a house. And I've been mentioned, as I said, 5 times I've been hit. I've actually never been hurt in a crash with a car, which, fingers crossed it stays that way in my life. But exactly. But I put that down to my martial arts training. And even when I played soccer or did any sport, I'd actually been doing martial arts for such a long time when I was young that learning how to roll and take impact was instrumental in me recovering quickly. So the bike was written off, my helmet was smashed, but I was able to get back up and walk away from it. Driving instructor guy tried to drive away until someone blocked him in. And
wow.
Yeah, Bankstown has a few interesting personalities, understandably. So
then when it comes to insurance, like did his insurance cover your new bike or what happened?
Well, I had to chase him. I had to chase him for insurance and that. Yeah, so generally when the accident is severe enough, if they're in the wrong, certainly you can claim on their third-party insurance and that'll be fine. But a lot of people don't acknowledge that bikes cost as much money as they do.
Yeah.
And they think that, $500 or $1,000 is enough to cover. Back then, as I was racing, I had bikes which were worth $4,000 or $5,000, and the ones I've got now are worth a lot more, but we won't tell the wife that. That's what happened.
Yeah, wow. So. Okay. Let's go back to the finance side of things. So, I guess working in a bank, what was that experience like for you?
It was quite an interesting experience in personal growth. Those days, the banks used to have managers which were 50-odd years of age. They used to have a full complement of staff. The branch that I was at, we had a manager, we had an accountant, then we had 4 loans officers, they had a signing officer, and then they had, tellers, and then they had clerks, and I started out as a clerk. I suppose my work ethic really meant that I moved up quite quickly. So I worked through all of those roles in the bank within a few years. So I was actually the youngest relief manager that they'd had on staff at that time. So at 21, I was managing branches at Double Bay and Coogee and a few of the smaller branches, but still, I was at 21-year-old running when most of the time you were 50-odd years of age to get to that type of position.
Yeah.
I was very good. I'd have clients walk in and they go, "Oh, John, can you get me a balance on my account?" And I go, "There you go." But I didn't give you the account. It's okay, not off by heart, it's all good. I just was good with numbers, and I'm sure if you ask my math teacher what's this person doing in a bank, they'd have a heart attack. But because it was just something that came to me quite. Again, I put a good ethic into my work, and I did a very good job. When I was a teller, banks used to have a thing which they call slicker. So back then, you used to write all your end of day notes into a book, and you count all your money and everything like that. And if that book was perfected with no alterations on it, they call that a slicker. Okay, and I was able to complete. I was over a year's worth of slickering, and they gave me an award because that hadn't been done in the bank before. People not adjusting numbers or anything like that. It was just what I did. I just did things very well. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist on things. I get a little bit OCD on how I want things done, and that's the way I was. I just focused on making sure it was the best.
So when you say you you had this knack for numbers. Was it just in terms of memorizing numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it was something which, growing up, we had to walk to phones, or you had to, ring your friends from your home phone.
You know your numbers.
You'd know all the numbers.
Yeah.
You know all the numbers. These days we've got these smartphones which make us dumb, and we don't remember any numbers.
Yeah.
it's a shame.
It's funny, because I was the same, right? Like I could remember all these people's. I still remember their phone numbers. They don't live there anymore. Like
right,
there's probably some other people living. They probably don't even have a home phone anymore.
Exactly.
But the people that I used to regularly call, I know all their numbers off by heart. And like I sort of took it to a different level. Like I have my credit card number memorized, my license number, passport, like everything's all in my head.
Yes.
So it's like my wife is like trying to buy something. She's like, "What's your credit card number?" And just rattle it off. And then she's like, "How do you remember these
dangerous.
things?" Yeah, it is dangerous, right? But yeah, like it's just one of those things that I don't know what in your brain decides that hey, you can start to memorize these things. But it's just perhaps it's the repetition of having to continually dial it or whatever.
Yep.
But it just gave me a bit of a knack to do that as well. It wasn't intentional.
No.
It doesn't serve any other purpose in life.
No, that's right. Exactly right. Like it's something which, again, memorizing those numbers really helped me understand where I was going. But as you say, like the brain holds on to some really strange things sometimes. I remember as a kid, my father used to love watching Sailor of the Century. And he was always, as I said, he wasn't that highly educated, but he was always a wealth of knowledge. So he'd always try and beat the people with the answers. So it was something which my brother and I, being competitive, were always trying to get the answers out before him. So I'm sure our brains and most people in general, their brains are just full of so much rubbish that's only going to be used maybe once or twice in their life ever.
Yeah.
But we remember things.
That's exactly what my wife says about, she's like, "How do you know these things?" All right. And it'll be like, it could be really corrupt things.
Yep.
and she'll be like, "How do you know this stuff?" And I'm like, look, I've lived life,
That's exactly just a past experience. Know that well, yes. And it's a good thing to know a lot of variable things. It's I've seen a lot of smart people out there which have got no street smarts.
Yeah.
They're very intelligent, but you seem to go, well, why are you in this dumb situation? Like you're supposed to be smart.
Yeah.
It's because they haven't got this worldly knowledge. They don't have that street smarts, and I've seen that a lot.
Well, I think, for you, being exposed to very contrasting work environments definitely helps your ability to relate to people,
Yes.
right? From going from being in a factory style, trade workshop, very blue collar,
Yes.
I'm guilty of it too. But when I did my apprenticeship, I had the worst mechanic's mouth. Like every second word was F this, F that, and it's like because you're in that environment.
Exactly.
It's like how you feel like you have to fit in.
Yeah, most definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you go to a white collar workplace like a bank.
Yep.
And suddenly, there's a very different expectation in terms of how you speak. You definitely won't get away with saying those kinds of words.
No.
Right? And how you conduct yourself with customers. And you have to sort of tailor your approach and how you speak to them in a very different manner.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But then that's a very valuable life skill in that sense that, you become a bit of a chameleon. You sort of understand how to read people.
Yep.
And as a result of that, how do you respond and actually articulate to them, what is the right thing to say?
Most definitely. That's a big factor. And, again, going from a blue-collar place where they're all guys, say and speak and do whatever they want, then going to finance, which eventually, it wasn't when I first started, but within a few years it became very much female-dominated. So you have to conduct yourself completely differently. It also, again, having that ability to interact between different mindsets is important. Towards the end of my career in the finance within the branches, because I did move into head office for a long time as well, I actually had people who would only deal with me because they didn't want to deal with the head office or didn't want to deal with any of the other people in the branch because I understood them, I understood their business. And they would regularly say, look, unless John's in the room, we're not discussing finance. We want to go through things with Jon. Jon will explain things to us, and then I can come back and work it with the way the bank needed to do things as well. So I had that. I could be the medium between the two, which was very valuable. And that actually also crossed over when I started doing security. So I'm not the biggest guy, but having that ability to relate and talk to people is such an instrumental part in controlling a situation. You get a lot of big guards who can't talk enough. They don't understand enough. And then, as I mentioned, they tend to over-exaggerate their emotions and they get angry too quickly. And that would cause them to make mistakes and being a little bit too rough on people. In the early days of security, everything was very rough.
Why the foray into security? So was that after the bank or during?
That was during the bank, which is quite interesting. So if you remember the movie Fight Club,
yep,
that's almost how it used to look when I'd turn up at the bank some days. You walk into the office and people just looking sideways at you because you got a cut or busted up knuckles and stuff like that. I moved into security. I had a little bit of an inkling towards it anyway, in that my mother's side of the family has some people in security who are quite well known in the security industry. So, every now and then you'd talk to them at Christmas parties and stuff like that. He actually used to play football for St George, so he got into security through that side of things. And then when I was training in the martial arts very heavily, we had a guy walk into the gym and said, "Look, I want to know some of your best fighters in the gym." And so there was me and about 4 or 5 other guys there, and he watched us train and picked us out. And he says, "Okay, look, I'll help you guys go get your security license if you're going to come and work for me." Okay, so we went and got the security licenses all lined up and went working for him, and basically we're almost employed as clean-up crews. So he wanted our group of guys to go to certain establishments, discourage the unwanted people from that establishment to no longer be there, and then he'd move us to another establishment to do the same type of thing.
Yeah.
The purpose of discouraging people can sometimes get a bit more aggressive, which is why he wanted fighters to do it. So,
of course.
So that was the nature of the game back then. It was quite a lot harder. It's certainly not like it is now. But at the same time, I had a good ability to talk to people, and I try and reason and get people to understand things.
De-escalate.
De-escalate. I think that's the most important thing is having the ability to control a scenario where nothing goes wrong. Anytime a fight breaks out in a public place, it's quite a confronting thing for a lot of people. And if you're dealing with a public place, which is an establishment which is due to make money from the public, if there's a fight in that establishment, then that has the potential to impact on the establishment's reputation and certainly earnings for that night.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the more we can reduce that, the better chance the establishment has to make money.
Yep.
Which is what we're there for as far as I'm concerned. Making sure everyone has a good time, being safe, and the establishment makes their money, everyone has a fun time. That's what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we used to, just do the work. My belief as a security guard was to try and talk to people, get to know as many people as possible. If there is a problem, try and be on top of it as soon as possible. Doing security should never be, about yourself. It should be about trying to look after other people. And again, flowing back to why I started martial arts was to protect people in the first place, protect friends and family. So it really crossed over quite well mentally for me to do.
Yep. Okay. So then, when you forayed into security, that was during your time at the bank?
Yeah.
And then, so how did then, what happened after that? How did you transition?
So one of the things that I was very good at banking.
Yep.
But I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, okay.
And it was one of those situations where I knew this wasn't my forever job.
Yep.
But
we still gave it a good crack, 14 years?
Yeah, 12 years, 12, 13 years, just under 13 years. So I managed to understand that this wasn't what I wanted to do, but I didn't have the means to do what I wanted to do at the time. So working was the means to create that opportunity. The security gave me a bit of extra cash money, but also gave me connections and experience, which I thought was valuable. By this stage, I'd already decided that I wanted to get more into my martial arts, my training of people, having that understanding how to help people in that regard. I set up my personal training business around 2000. Actually, it was 99 that I actually created the business. And I was already starting to train in some jiu-jitsu. I was training very heavily in Jin-Wukong and Kung Fu back then. And I was actually instructing it as well, so I was teaching it. And it was the path that I had the most fun doing. It was the path that I felt the most comfortable in. And I wanted to make that my path. Now, it was just a process of working out how to make it financially viable for myself. And I suppose taking on the security work around that time, a little bit before then as well, was just a means of be able to provide myself with some income outside of the bank should I want to leave the bank.
Yeah.
So it's one of the reasons as well.
Yeah. Okay. So let's sort of talk about the martial arts pathway then, because that will then sort of all tie up together as then we start talking more about, the state of, the fighting scene and mixed martial arts and all that sort of stuff. So what was the first martial art you did and what age did you start?
First martial art I did was judo.
Judo, okay.
I was 9 years old. So my parents used to live just down from Sutherland Police Boys Club.
Okay.
So I used to walk up the road. It's literally 500 metres, Sutherland Police Boys Club, train judo there. It was a really good experience. It gave me a very clear a directive on what traditional martial arts is like, because it was a very traditional judo. It wasn't a sports judo. So there is a distinction between the two.
Yep.
Sports judo is predominantly designed for Olympic styles competition, where this was a traditional style of judo. So you had to do all your bowing, all your honour, all your respect stuff. You had to conduct yourself a certain way when you're on the mat at all times. I did that until I went to high school, when I decided that I needed to know a little bit more than just judo, because this school was a little bit more violent than what a judo would allow. So
you would have ripped quite a few people's shirts if you're trying to put some judo throws in there.
Throw them around. So I made a green belt in judo, I think it was. I was by that stage. So that's when I started. I explored a few different martial arts. I had a look at some taekwondo. I did some karate systems, probably about 3 to 6 months in each. And then I found Peter, which was a gentleman training Kung Fu down at Como Public School. Now, Peter was an interesting person in that he was an ex-Shaolin performer who had come to Australia and was not speaking English very well. So we used to teach him a bit of English, and we'd give him $5 a week for payment type of thing. And he'd teach us, Chinese Kung Fu. Amazing man. Very much in the role model of a Bruce Lee, in that he was about the same stature, quite a small man, but just explosive. And I've watched him do sword demonstrations with double broadswords, doing backflips and all that type of stuff. It was phenomenal at what he did. Peter was a person we trained with probably 2 times a week at least, sometimes 3. I'd ride my BMX down there, do the training, come back. He was just a great inspiration for us at that age. He was a good person. But unfortunately, we turned up at training one night, and there was a man there who used to look after Peter, and he said, Peter's been deported. And it's like, as a kid, you're 15 years old, it's like, how'd this happen? It's like, what's going on, And it's like he didn't do his visas correctly, and he couldn't stay in Australia, so they've sent him back to China. And we were heartbroken. There was a group of us, actually. There was another young man training at that time named Cameron Johnson. I don't know whether you know anything about the Australian kickboxing, but Cameron Johnson was one of the best kickboxers in Australia. And this will come back through my journey as I get into things. So Cameron used to be this wild young guy from Cronulla who used to tell us about his fights in Cronulla, or that he used to have all the time whilst we were training in the Kung Fu system. So he was about a year older than me. I used to look up to him a little bit, and he was quite a very athletic and strong young kid. So he was someone I could challenge myself with and stuff like that. So it was good. So when Peter left, unfortunately, I had to look around a little bit, and I come across another Kung Fu system I wanted to try. Was training under a gentleman by the name of Sifu Chen Chuk Fei. Now, Chuk Fei had the Jim Woo Kun system he used to train, and myself and another 2 mates at the time from school would get on a train at Sutherland and travel into Chinatown, and we'd do that twice a week to learn under Chuk Fei. And that was my path all the way through till midway through year 11, when again I was probably partying a little bit too much and my grades had dropped off. My family said to me that I had to stop training until such time as my schoolwork improved. So I trained with Chuk Fei for a couple of years, and trained in his first gym that I trained at was in the back of Chinatown somewhere. There was a hole in the elevator's floor, so you had to stand on the outside edge of the elevator because
you
you
see
can
straight
look
through
all
the
the way,
elevator.
look straight down. We're going up 5 or 6 floors, and you're looking down at this elevator with a hole in the floor. It was quite interesting, but very traditional. And then he moved to his Dixon Street address about a year later, which he was at for a long time.
That was the one on top of the Sussex Underground, right?
Yep. So, that was where he was for a long time, and that was where I did most of my training under Chen Chuk Fei, and it was just experience, travelling into Chinatown on a train and walking through Chinatown at 15, 16 years old, and you're seeing a lot of different cultural things as well, which I think is an important part for me as well.
Yeah.
At that age. As I said, end of year 11, I got told I had to knuckle down with schooling. So I stopped training for a few years, but went back when I was about 22, 23. And I actually went back to Chinese Kung Fu because I was racing mountain bikes at the time, and I had a fairly big crash. And I did an AC in my shoulder, my left shoulder. And I saw the martial arts as a way of training and rehabilitating the shoulder.
Yep.
So that was my mentality. So I looked around for something. At this time, again, I'm working at the bank, and it was keeping me quite busy. So I found that at Southern PCYC, which again was not far from my parents' place, a man by the name of Mick Spinks was setting up Kung Fu there. And I looked into it, and Mick Spinks was actually trained by Chen Chuk Fei. And Mick Spinks was also currently training Cameron Johnson. So there was a tie-in. He was trained under Chuk Fei, and was training one of the people I used to train with. So I went, okay, well, I'm walking up the road to go and train here. And I started training there 3 nights a week and just kept building with it from there. And that was my path forward within the martial arts. Mick was an amazing instructor. He had a very good understanding, and I also had that connection back to Chuk Fei, because Chuk Fei was an even more amazing man again to me. And so I could feel very comfortable there, and it felt like home, which I thought was so important. From there, Mick moved from the PCYC to where Double Dragon exists in today's day. So he rented that factory space, and we used to go in there and help him put things in. We put the fans on the walls. we build this for him. We do that. That's the way it happened back then. Back in the days of being a martial arts instructor, your students did all the work for you.
Yeah.
You want something built, make them do the work.
Yeah,
that's how it was, and that's what we did with Chuk Fei as well when he moved things around for him. So that was just understanding these days.
It's that very traditional patriarchal style of martial arts teaching.
Yeah, it was.
And most traditional styles are that way, where you revere and you respect the master to that point where it's like you're doing anything that you can for them. Most
definitely, and it's something which I've seen at the high levels. Like if Chuk Fei ever took us out for lunch or dinner, we walk into a restaurant, Golden Circle or any place like that, like good restaurants in Chinatown, and they would refuse to let him pay. They would straight out refuse. We'd have the money out ready to pay them, and they knock it back. And that was something which, again, Chuk Fei had such a reputation, such an honour bestowed upon him, because he was such a good man as well. And as a young man growing up, you see that, and it's the right side of things to see. It's being in security, I've seen the wrong side of things as well. And you can see people which are being, looked upon as being, somewhat role models for people to step up to, but they're not.
Yeah.
Whereas Chuk Fei was a role model to step up to. He was a good man in every way. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why I want to follow that path. Definitely.
Yeah. I always find this really interesting because in today's world, there's a real sort of delineation from that sort of traditional mindset. Yeah. Right. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong either, because I think there's both positive and negative aspects to both sides of it, right? Because I feel like, you need structure to obviously grow, and having structure can actually help you to understand a lot more things and help you develop in a very fast way. Yeah. But then there comes a point where that structure then can become very constrictive to your own personal development, but you have to get to that first level before you can get to that point, right?
See that, that's right.
And the other thing that I find about it is that, especially with like that traditional mindset, it comes to this point where it's like things can sort of feel like an obligation.
Yep.
right? And because like, you know, things aren't very transparent in terms of like, say, as an example, like with money, right? Like you might get to train for free. You might get to do all these things for free. So then it's like, because there's no real clear transaction anymore, like all the lines have become very blurred. And it's nice if you have a very close relationship with somebody, but at the same time, that can also then become a friction point, because it's like, you know, when people have different expectations and the way that they, as an example, if the student wants something different to what the master wants, then it becomes this friction point, because it's like, well, you know, I don't charge you to train. Like, why are you demanding these things of me?
Yes.
Right. And it can become a real sticking point for the relationship.
Most definitely. I went through exactly that scenario with Mick. It was that scenario where I was doing a lot of work for him, and then there was, again, I wasn't having to pay for training, but at the same time, there was a change in our situation between the two of us, which became uncomfortable eventually. I mean, one of the reasons why I stepped out into my own gym. I wanted him to be in my corner, but he for my first 5 professional fights, he wasn't there. And that came from the fact that he didn't see MMA as being a path forward at that time. So it became there was different expectations from both of us. Something which I try and instill now in any of the young guys or girls I have working for me, is that I still have them paying a membership, but I'm paying them a wage. So they're two separate transactions. I try and keep 2 separate transactions. I'm going to give you everything you need as far as being a paying member, as you would normally expect. But as an employer, I'm going to expect you to be my employee for what I need as well. So I try not to blur those lines, because I've been burnt by those blurred lines quite heavily, and it's upsetting me, because I lost a father figure from it, in my opinion. So it's challenging.
And you know, I know that what I would have just said would resonate for you, because it's exactly like what I went through as well. So, you know, a bit of a background history. So Chuk Fai, and so my Master James, they were probably, I think there was originally like 4 Kung Fu schools that started back in the, I don't know, late 70s or early 80s or whatever. So there was only like 4 recognized Kung Fu schools at that point in time. So Double Dragon was one, Five Ancestors Fist, which is where I trained, was another one. I don't remember the other 2. Might have been Choi Li Fut and one of the other ones.
Choi Li Fut was there, definitely. And I don't remember his name. He still trains. So we'll come back to it. So there was only 4 recognized Kung Fu schools. And for me, you know, like, so I started karate as a kid. So I did karate from like 5 to 12, and it was a fairly Okinawan-based style of karate. I'm thinking off the top of my head, but and then when I found Kung Fu, it was just because like I had another friend at high school who was doing it, and I'd taken a couple of years off karate because it was just a bit of a travel, and you know, not to say I lost interest, but it was just like we moved houses, so we moved to a different area, and so the training wasn't really the same anymore. And so you know, when one of my other family friends was like, oh, you know, I'm doing this, come join, like, you know, like we both started together. I stuck with it, he didn't. You know, it was just one of those things. That's what happens.
And you know, that was a massive part of my life. But you know, going through that towards the later stages where, you know, I sort of had to exit myself from it, was just because like things weren't clear anymore. You know, and when I had started, you know, I thought the direction in terms of, you know, why you train martial arts was very clear. You know, that you need to be able to defend yourself. You need to be able to tick off these boxes X, Y, and Z. Right? But then over the years, it's like, you know, whether the training sort of devolved because it was like, oh, we're worried about, you know, students getting injured, and you're worried about this, and you're worried about that. And it's like, okay, we're getting to the point where it's just going to be like Tai Chi now.
That's exactly what happened in my system as well, in that, you know, we would go through gradings to get to certain levels, and people were getting injured. Like we had a guy with a broken jaw, a fractured arm, all these type of things. And then towards the later years of my training, people going for those same grades were walking away as if they hadn't even had a workout. They were barely breaking a sweat. It's like, well, where's that intensity that had originally been there when we come through? And unfortunately, as you're saying, is that there become a lot more awareness on possible liability and so forth. So martial arts did get reduced to a more simpler term, definitely a watered down version.
You just made me think of this memory. So we had this guy come from another style to sort of, you know, try and, I guess, test himself.
Yes.
And we used to, so in Kung Fu, and you guys probably did this as well, but there's a lot of like conditioning.
Yes.
Like, so where you're just literally just smacking
Each
arm
other.
on arm,
Yep.
bone on bone.
Yep.
And, you know, it might sound very crude, but the logic is actually quite
effective.
sound. You know, you have microfractures, so to speak.
Yes.
But then, you know, over time they heal and the bones get denser and they become more solid. And so we had this guy, we dubbed him Bug Boy because he had come from praying mantis.
Yes, yes.
You know, he got put through the ringer and,
Rightly so, yes.
And like, you know, obviously walked away, couldn't lift his arms or whatever. And do you remember, there used to be this forum, I can't remember if it was Kung Fu Magazine forum or something like that everybody used to be on back in those days.
Yes, yes.
And he put up this whole like post about duty of care and all this sort of stuff. It's like, oh, you know, like, dude, you say your arms are jacked, but, you know, you're there able to type, you know, 4-page essay on a forum about what's going on here.
That was exactly the situation. In those days, you know, you had to be tough to survive.
Yeah.
To get through to certain levels, you had to be tough.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people would have this expectation that they've, you know, watched a few movies and that they can do things. And it still happens today, to be honest. And they walk in and they just work out real quick that, you know, they're not what they thought they were.
Yeah.
And that realization of some people will step up and other people will just crumble and other people will whinge about it.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. So that's where it's like I can see the merits in terms of the alternative style, like the more Western way of approach to martial arts, where you view it from that transactional approach. Yes, you pay a membership, but this is what you get.
Yes.
You know, you pay your membership to get X, Y, and Z.
That's right.
This is what we're going to focus on developing you on. And if that resonates for you, you stay. If that doesn't resonate for you, you go find another place to train. Right?
Lots of places, yeah.
Yeah. So when it came to then for you, you know, you brought up your first couple of fights and let's talk a little bit about the fighting side. So what was the first competition that you actually did?
So I'd actually done some kickboxing. I actually had 2 kickboxing bouts, 2 boxing bouts at amateur level, and then 2 Muay Thai bouts. Just a bit of a feeler to see, you know, what I enjoyed. Predominantly with the school, the kickboxing was what the school was really pushing to do, but I tried to explore a few of those avenues. I was just dabbling in a bit of grappling at this stage, in that we'd have John Will come up once or twice a year and do a seminar at the school, and then we try and recreate that skill set over the next 6 to 12 months. So it wasn't very much of a focus for us overall. The Kung Fu was our main focus. We were very heavy. Chuck Fay's school had a very good striking combat system in that we were always very good at when we went to tournaments. And a lot of I did a couple of karate tournaments and so forth, but I ended up getting disqualified both times I went in them because they wouldn't allow leg kicks. And
oh, really?
Leg kicks was something we did.
Was it? And I don't say this to shit on them, but so I got DQ'd from a national all styles comp.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it was one of those.
Yep.
Okay.
They come in and say it's all styles, but then you've got a certain rule set which doesn't really suit all styles.
Yeah. It's funny. Like I'm very big on the idea that it's the rule set that actually dictates what the style of a fighter will look like. So you know, in most fighting arts, you know, a punch is a punch. You know, there's only specific ways that you can throw a punch, whether it's a jab, a hook, a looping punch, or a hook, or an uppercut.
That's right.
Or a back fist, or a hammer fist, right? Like there's only really like those 6 ways that you can sort of throw a punch. But then, you know, the rule set will determine how that actually gets put together. Because if you go to boxing where you don't allow back fists and you don't allow specific strikes, you know, the gloves you have to hit with the front knuckles of the glove and those sorts of things, the style changes. And then the moment you add in leg kicks for kickboxing, the style changes. You change to Muay Thai and you add the clinch.
That's right.
You add elbows, you add knees. Like it all shapes the style, which is really interesting, especially with the way MMA is sort of developing at the present moment. Yeah. So so the last couple of Wollongong Wars, as an example, was done under Massa A-class rules. Yes. And you know the knees
exactly
knees to the head, and it made such a big impact because you could see the guys that had fought in Muay Thai and had the experience with the knees versus the guys who didn't.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good impact there. So that. There needs to be a little bit more clarity on, because each governing body is allowing certainly different things. I would like to see the governing bodies get together and actually settle on an amateur rule set which is across the board. I always fought pro as such, so I didn't have to worry about these changes in structures. But I do have an amateur team now, and having, some of them fight on one tournament, which, or one event which says they're allowed knees, and they go to another event and they're not allowed knees, and that creates a little bit of confusion, and it can cause DQs, it can cause, even that momentary lapse in focus can cause a loss in the fight. If I want to throw I'm not allowed to throw a knee. That split second is fundamentally a time when you could have been doing something else. So I would like to see them consolidate their
rule set. Yes. So it's funny, like, because so for people that aren't into the mixed martial arts side of things, is like the governing bodies might have like an A, B, and C class rule set.
That's right.
And so a C class rule set would mean that they're wearing shin guards. Some C class rule sets don't allow striking when you're on the ground. Or like punches to the head when you're on the ground.
Some, not
some,
all of them.
Not all.
So
that's right. So it depends where you're fighting, and it's always really interesting. Like at one of the events, I won't say the event, and I won't say which governing body, but I was commentating for that event, and it was like they were doing the rules meeting, and then they didn't mention anything about leg locks. And so I always check, because it's like, I need to know what's going to be a legal technique and not, so that when I'm commentating, I know explain it to people, right? And so I asked the question, and I kicked off a massive shit fight. Like,
I've seen these happen.
Where it's like, this is amateur class competition. Like, they shouldn't be doing rotational leg lock finishes. Blah 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 blah. And I was like, I get it, but I'm just trying to understand, so that if it does come up, right, I got to be able to talk about
it,
right? And like, it wasn't, I wasn't trying to kick off a shit fight. I just didn't realize that it was such a big thing that people, like, the people from the governing body and the people running the event were suddenly going to be up in arms and say, hey, don't say anything about this. Don't tell the fighters that they're allowed, let's just operate without them.
I've seen like almost fights break out at rules meetings simply for that reason, that there's somebody who wants certain rules, and especially back in the early days, even as a pro, there was people trying to negotiate what they can and can't use in a fight. Now, I would always just say, I just don't care. Like, realistically, you put me in a match, I'm going to fight. I actually had a conversation with Steve Percival once. We were at a show, and someone was saying that they wouldn't allow, kicks to the body or the legs of a down opponent. And I shouted, I said, Steve, mate, I don't care whether we're playing pride rules here, mate. Let's just get out there and fight, And everyone's looking around going, what's going on? It's like, well, in my personal opinion, you do have to fight to it, the rule set. It's provided for you, but I've also come from an environment where the older school days, if you made mistakes, you paid a price. So I would have nothing against pride-style rules. I understand that they're not what we implement here in Australia, and I've got no problems with that. But if I was to be in a match where someone said, look, we're going to do soccer kicks, ground opponent, well, don't put yourself in that position. Don't be in the wrong position to start with. Control the fight better.
And that's the thing. Like, I think that also comes back to the training room as well. So in the training room, and I'm not saying that people should be soccer kicking people in the training room. That's absolutely not what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is that the awareness of what can actually be used, right? So, in every training room, like, there's going to be a mixture of athletes. There's going to be guys that might be just gearing up for their first fight. So C-class rules, right? Then there'll be people that are pros. And so understanding, what each of those guys can do is actually one of the key things to developing their actual style.
Most definitely.
And their awareness of what can be thrown at them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's something which I looked at a lot, was coming from my traditional martial arts background and then doing these all-style comps and so forth, and trialing a little bit of boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and getting into the jiu-jitsu, getting into the wrestling, and then the early days of MMA where you would be almost pitted against somebody from a particular style. So you learnt quite quickly to read what their skill set was going to be once you see them. And that crossed over to the security field when you'd see people shape up into fights. You almost know straight away, well, they're looking to do this, they're going to do that. And that became a skill set you had to develop to know what to react the right way. I'm very proud of the guys here at the gym here at the moment. We've got some great boxers. I've got some good kickboxers and Muay Thai guys. I've got my MMA team, and we all get in and spar. And each time we spar somebody who's got a limited skill set, we just spar to that skill set. So the MMA guys might do MMA, but they would then have their next round against a boxer who is just boxing. So we just box. I think that's important to be able to transition and make their skill set cleaner.
Well, so this is I don't think it's a relatively new concept, but it's something that I've been exploring a lot in my own reflection when I'm thinking about martial arts and my own study. And it was actually, I think Liam Reznikov and I were talking about it when I did the second podcast with him and Dylan, and we're talking about like, so I have this, and I'm going to try and like actually put it into one of my studies, but basically it's like if you think about a horizontal two-axis chart, right?
Yes.
On that x-axis is horizontal skill acquisition. Okay. So you think about your individual disciplines. So whether it's boxing, wrestling, judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, anything. You can put karate on that, kickboxing, whatever, taekwondo. The more styles you've been exposed to, well, that's your horizontal x-axis skill acquisition line. And then on the vertical line, it's like what is your depth in each of those particular styles?
The level of knowledge,
right? And so as an example, like a Floyd Mayweather, you know, on the horizontal axis, well, he's basically at 1 because he knows boxing.
Yep.
But then if you go on the y-axis, he's at 100.
Yep.
Right? Because he knows, you know, he's seen every single permutation.
Yep.
All he needs to do is just stay in that one stance in orthodox with his Philly shell, and he's seen every single opportunity or combination that could possibly be thrown at him and knows how to respond accordingly.
Most definitely.
Right? Whereas, you know, in mixed martial arts, there are a variety of different fighters and there's no one right or wrong approach.
No.
But there are guys who have so many different tools that it's like they just keep trying key after key after key after key until they find success.
Yes.
Right? But then there are guys who maybe only have 3 things, but they're very, very high level at it.
Yes.
You know? So it's really interesting to see how that all unfolds. And I think that's one of the things that we're heading into this new age of MMA at the present moment. And you can see it in the amateur competition. Like, by the time these guys are stepping in the ring, the level is
skills
pretty freaking high.
Now, you're saying new age. I actually believe it's revisiting. Okay, and I'll say that for a reason, is that humanity's been fighting since our dawn of time. Okay, and if you go back to what we would have had as our tools, we would have picked up sticks, stones, whatever. We would have fought anywhere to survive. Whether it be wrestling or striking or whatever it was. Then I think through that timeline, we've honed certain skill sets, which have then become certain styles. And then those styles have had their own little place in the world. And I now see that we're coming back to more of a true essence of fighting style. And the MMA is what I see in that, is that you should be able to handle whatever's placed in front of you. And that's always been my belief in life anyway, is that, you know, become comfortable where everyone else is uncomfortable. So, you know, if you can't grapple, learn to grapple. If you can't wrestle, learn to wrestle. If you can't strike, learn to strike. You know, and if you want to be a good fighter, you need, in MMA in particular, you need to be comfortable across the board. And we're seeing the athletes now being exposed to training environments which give them that from such a young age. I've got 4 or 5-year-olds training in MMA now, which is amazing. I can show them some of these fundamentals straight away. Whereas in our day and age, I had a style. You know,
it was all single discipline versus discipline.
Exactly. And they were very rigid in that regard. You know, you didn't go to another discipline unless you were, you know, betraying your other discipline. You know, it just didn't happen. So towards the middle and later part of my career, we started to get exposed to more cross-training references, which was great. And that's why the MMA has really developed now. But, you know, there was a period of time where if you didn't want box, you wanted to box, you had to box. If you wanted to do karate, you had to do karate. You know, there was no crossover. And as a young kid, my father actually didn't want me to do martial arts.
Really?
He said to me, you know, go and learn to box.
Okay.
He'll support me to go and box, but he didn't want to support me to go do martial arts. And that's just my father being the hardline guy he was. But I wanted to do martial arts, which is why I went down that path. And you see, you know, now I know more about the martial arts landscape, and there was athletes back then which were doing bits of crossover work. Even Muhammad Ali did a bout, you know,
didn't end well.
Exactly, but
his legs were pretty jacked.
Exactly, but this was something that was starting to take place. That's going back into the 40s and 50s, 60s type of thing. And then if you look back further, well, I'm pretty sure that there's been times when different disciplines have fought different disciplines. Go back to the gladiator day. Well, you had to be a fighter no matter what. And I see it. So it's not new. It's the revisitation of what it's moved in a circle. We've come back to where I think we should be.
Yeah. Well, I think the difference is that you know, when you're fighting for war, And especially like when you think about like those gladiator style arenas and things like that. Yeah, it's life or death, right? And you've got weapons though.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, we're basically pared it all back and said your only weapons are what you've got, right? And so, you know, having a weapon would have been a massive advantage in those days where it's like if you're armed and your opponent is unarmed, then you could get away with a different level of skill.
Most definitely,
right?
yes.
Versus now, okay, you're both actually just unarmed.
Yes.
Now it's really going to come down, and also taking away the size advantage by making weight classes.
Yep.
Now it's like, okay, now you're really having to test the skill level and the skill development of each individual fighter versus, you know, you can't rely on being the slightly bigger guy, or you can't rely on having a weapon where your opponent doesn't have a weapon.
Yep.
Right? And I think that's what makes it so fun.
Most definitely. It's something which, and on that weapon side of things, I'm sure with your traditional Kung Fu, you were exposed to weapon training, as I was as well. But I always put more emphasis on my hand-to-hand combat training because I had the belief that at some point in time, I don't have a weapon with me.
Yeah.
I don't have, or if I got lost that weapon through the bout, what am I going to do? So my firm belief was train your body to be the weapon.
Yep.
Have that as the most effective tool. The other add-ons are just additional advantages if you have them.
Yeah.
You know, but make your body the weapon, and that's what I've always believed.
just while I'm thinking about it, have you seen those? I think it's called Boo-Hurt,
The
medieval combat guys.
Yes.
So for anyone listening who wants to see something funny, I think it's spelled Buhurt. Check it out. I might actually, you know, want to do a match like that one day because it just looks like a lot of fun. It's dudes in medieval armor, and they've got like, you know, axes which are blunt and swords that are blunt, and they just literally bash the shit out of each other, right? But I saw this one where like there was this because they do like small 5-on-5 style competitions, right? And there was one where it's like, you know, one dude's like, you know, beating up on this other guy, and then the other guy's teammate just comes up from behind and literally just butts him with the handle of his axe in the back of the head. This guy just drops.
Yep.
And it's like, how is this shit legal?
Exactly. It's like, that's heavy metal armor, and it's going to resonate when you get hit in the helmet, I'm pretty sure.
Concussion for sure.
Oh, most definitely. That's there's some brutal things out there. And again, I've got nothing really wrong. If that's what you want to have fun doing, by all means do it. But it's
just imagine when the MMA development hits the Boo-Hurt arena, right? Like, you know, this guy will get knocked down, and then next thing you know, he's doing a rotational heel hook finish on on this other guy in medieval armor, and you won't be able to get your foot out because it's a solid boot.
That's right, it's locked in there. But that's the thing again, that like there's the event over in Italy somewhere where they do once a year, and it's like a football match with an all-out brawl taking place at the same time. And these type of things have been happening throughout the ages, and you know, medieval times, and fighting is something which humanity does very well, and I think it's such an important factor for anybody, male or female, going out to find that comfort in environments which are quite confronting. So that's why I really believe in the training for personal development. And you know, when I was working in finance, you know, I was a young guy and I'm sitting at a desk in meetings with, you know, 40, 50-year-old men. I didn't have any fear of them because I'd been training for long times, you know. Like on the weekend, I'm sparring a guy who's a world kickboxing champion. What am I going to worry about this bloke in a suit who's overweight? You know, like I didn't have that fear, and training enabled me to be quite comfortable in environments which someone my age probably should have been quite uncomfortable in.
Absolutely. Let's talk a bit about the pro MMA career. Yes. So when you decided, hey, I'm going to have a crack at this. You mentioned that, so Mick obviously wasn't in your corner for your first few fights.
No, unfortunately. But back then, I'd actually had some amateur pancration, which you're aware of.
So for people that don't know what pancration is, so pancration is basically there's striking but no strikes to the head.
That's right.
And then it favours, I would say it favours a more wrestling-oriented game, because once you take it to the ground, you can obviously chase your submissions and things like that. And so, you know, obviously striking without headshots is a very different ball game, because unless, you know, you can land a very clean liver shot or wind your opponent, it's generally going to end up in some form of a grapple. Right?
Grapple. That's right. So I'd attended the state titles for that, and a little bit of a background in that. I turned up and there was a couple of other people registered in my weight division, which was welterweight, 77. But after I warmed up, they weren't there in the division anymore. I got told I had to step up to the 84 kilo division. So I went up to the 84 and I ended up winning through to the final. And I got silver on a split decision loss. But I weighed probably 75 kilos ringing wet, coming from mainly that cycling background. So I was fit and strong, but I was relatively light. And this guy was definitely an 84 kilo bloke. He's a good mate now, I know him. And he won. Fair and square, I had a point deducted from a head strike again. You weren't supposed to punch the head, but reactions happen. And I did hit him, so I lost a point there. And then I ended up losing on a split point loss overall. But it was something which went, well, I really enjoy this. This is the MMA side of things. It's a modified MMA. Was fun. So they invited me to come to the Australian titles, and I cleaned up there pretty convincingly. Again, very little grappling background. I hadn't done any wrestling at this stage really at all, but I'd done some jiu-jitsu since '99. This was in 2003. That winning the Australian title gave me the ticket to go to Denmark, where the world titles were being conducted. And amateur competitions, you have to fund your own way. So, worked hard, got some funding together, and we went across to Denmark for the Worlds. And I managed to pick up a bronze over there at the world titles, which was, a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Got put out of the gold medal competition by the guy who actually won the gold medal. He was an Israeli guy, and he was a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. I was up on points up until the last 30 seconds when he managed to get me down to the ground, and he just submitted me. And it was just the way it went. Again, I had very little grappling experience at this stage. So I got back from that, and I started to focus a bit more on the jiu-jitsu. So I was training with Bruno Pano, and the likes of Liam was a blue belt back then as well, and a few of the other well-known black belts that are in Sydney. We're all training together. Ian Schaefer, even back then you had Alex Prates and Bernardo Treco. We're all training together in one place because there wasn't many jiu-jitsu schools around that were worthwhile going to. So we're all together there. And that started to hone me up. I blew a knee out through my Kung Fu training actually in 2004. So I had basically the whole of 2004 off. And then in February 2005, I got a call from a gentleman by the name of Shane Barmer. Now, Shane Barmer was running a program called Warriors Realm. And Shane wanted to put together an 8-man tournament of welterweights in Queensland for his show Warriors Realm 4. So he'd run 3 previous Warriors Realms. He had the likes of, Elvis Sinisic and a few other ex-UFC guys on those early shows. Some of the early names, Larry and Peter Hickmont, a few other big names have been on those early shows. But he was actually running a cage show, which wasn't heard of back then. So Warriors Realm was in a cage. There had been a cage show, I think it was 99. There was one cage show in Darling Harbour, and then there was none others run in Australia. XFC was running MMA in the ring up there in Queensland at the time, or everything was in Queensland. Nothing happened in Sydney. You had to go to Queensland, go to the backwoods. So he rang up and said, "Look, I want you for this event." That was about 2 weeks' notice because he obviously had someone pull out. Anyway, I've rocked up there, and we got there for the event, and unbeknownst to me, you had George Soteropoulos, you had Kyle Noak, you had there's 2 or 3 other quite well-known guys in MMA at the time, and you had myself and this American kid named Kobe Jones turned up as well. Now, unfortunately, when we've got there, only 6 of us have turned up. It's supposed to be an 8-man. So Shane's come to the decision that he's going to put on a 4-man using the 4 well-known guys, Kyle and George being 2 of them.
Yep.
And then he was going to match Kobe and myself up as an individual bout earlier on the card. So I went, yeah, look, I'm here. I'm here to fight. Let's fight. It's all good. Taking this fight on 2 weeks' notice, and I'm just going to go to fight. So I'd done, as I said, very little grappling, minimal wrestling at this stage. 2005, I was just coming back, feeling fit and strong. Got to the weigh-ins, and Kobe was a younger guy. I was 33 at this stage, so I've a lot more mature than what most people would start this sport at. And but I've been training again for a long time, and lots of different disciplines through my, kickboxing and stuff like that. Kobe had had 5 or 6 fights. He trained under BJ Penn back in Hawaii. He was a Hawaiian American. And he was currently training with Nathan Carnage Corbett up in Queensland in Muay Thai and stuff like that. He's come into the bout, and I've had a look at him. I've watched how he's moved when we stepped into that cage, and I threw a right hand which knocked him out and broke his jaw. So that was 20 seconds into the bout. So I finished the fight before I'd even broken a sweat.
Yep.
And it was something that resonated through the event, so much so that George came up to me after the show was over, said, "Mate, that right hand was unbelievable. Like, I'm glad you weren't in the 8-man type of thing after seeing that." It was something which then inspired me to go, well, I've got a path here. Let's go and play.
Yeah.
And that led to Shane bringing me back for a couple of shows later. Again, the funding was always difficult, bringing interstate fighters in, and I was a New South Wales guy, so they had to fly me up and so forth. And back in those days, for that first fight and for my first few fights, I just go to a mate, "Oh, look, I'm going for a fight on the weekend. You want to come up with me? I've got a plane ticket funded. We've got a place to stay," and that'd be my corner. Because, as I mentioned, I didn't have Mick supporting me, unfortunately, so I just used to take whoever I could with me. My next fight was against a gentleman by the name of Matt Cain. So Matt Cain went on to be the Warriors World Welterweight Champion. He actually won a couple of titles around Australia and was probably one of the better MMA guys in Australia at the time. So my second match was against Matt, and we went to war on each other. So much so it was actually I got a helmet, actually a gladiator helmet, as a trophy after I lost the bout. Unfortunately, he submitted me, but I had this trophy to come home with, which was a gladiator style helmet, and that was awarded for the best fight of the night. So they used to do, Shane used to do things like that, and but I had this desire to keep going, and I had a couple of more fights under Warriors Realm banner, and won a few of them, which was good. But what was starting to happen back then was certain shows would only pick certain fighters that they knew would just devote themselves to their shows. So I would always like to fight on XFC, but because I was already fighting on Warriors Realm, I couldn't get my fight on XFC because I was being promoted on Warriors Realm as such. So they were getting a little bit territorial with their fighters, which to me was a shame because I just wanted to fight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's all changing now.
It is, yes, now.
And I think in the right way, and like I can understand it from both perspectives, right? If you're a promoter and you're thinking about your show and you want people to recognize your show, then of course you want to be able to bring back names that people would recognize.
Yep, that's right.
But the pool actually allows, and I guess, if you look at each individual fighters, like, even in the amateur ranks, right? If you look at the people that they know, they're always going to bring their friends and family to watch these shows and to watch them compete.
That's right.
And it's interesting because, in terms of like how I try and approach things, I'm always looking to promote the fighter as well as the show. Like, the show is one thing because I think if the show does a good job, then what happens is that you see really good matchups.
Yep.
You have a very exciting night of fights. It's run in a beautiful venue that people want to go back to and enjoy the experience over and over again.
That's right.
Right? But then, if you actually look at who's the commodity is the fighter, right? And so, only through promoting them and getting more awareness about people who are up and comers, that then allows actually more for everybody.
Yes.
Right? Because now, like, if that individual fighter's profile is larger, then more people want to actually go and see, okay, what's happening with this guy's career? And look, they might only be on the hype train, which unfortunately that's a part of the game, right? Like, when you're winning, of course, everybody wants to follow you.
That's right.
And then when you lose, it feels like nobody wants to be around you.
That's right.
But, I think one of the things that the big organizations do really well is that they build these storylines.
Yes.
And if we think about the fight game in terms of entertainment, throughout history, right? It's always been about storylines. Whether it was boxing, Rumble in the Jungle, and people remember these storylines and the Destroyer Iron Mike Tyson, and people would pay all this money to go and watch these fights that last 10 seconds.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep, that's right.
Because of the storyline.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody bought into it because of the storyline. And what the big organizations do really well in terms of, you know, when you get to whether it's UFC or one championship, you know, first of all, like the money in purses isn't actually that great for most people until you become a champion.
Well and truly established, yep.
But the benefit is the platform.
Yes.
That now you've got this media machine behind you
right.
to help create the storylines and things like that. And that's, you know, a part where that crossover between entertainment and fighting, you know, as a spectator sport come into it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so I always find it really interesting, especially when I've started to do more of the things that I was doing. I feel like, you know, people have sort of resonated with that really, really well, just from that perspective, because it's like they can see that, you know, I try not to play any favorites. Like I just go and talk to anyone and everyone, because I want, you know, irrespective, like, and it's the strangest thing when I always have like, you know, two guys that I know fighting.
Competing, yeah.
Because it's like, you know, you got to be as fair as you can.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I've made it that my choice that, you know, for me, I'm always transparent. Like that's my core value, right?
Ethical, yeah.
Yeah, ethical, right? So, you know, like I talk to all the guys before the show, you know, and everyone that has been to multiple shows that I've been on, they'll know I ask pretty much the same questions every single time, where it's like, okay, you know, did you, you know, what was your camp like? What are you expecting tonight? You know, is there any particular finish? And I ask those questions not to, and I never ever share the information with the other fighter, right? And so I feel like, you know, that's part of the integrity piece.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think it's exciting when somebody calls what's going to happen and it unfolds for them.
Yep, that's
right.
You
know, that happened at, it was funny, at Wollongong Wars. So shout out to Josh Coolback, because one of his boys, Jacob, was fighting. It was his debut. And Jacob, he was late, so I didn't get a chance to talk to him. But I said to Josh quickly before, because we were about to start, and I go, "Oh, Josh, you know, what do you think's going to happen?" And he goes, "I reckon there's going to be a right overhand, or it's going to be a mauling, you know, with the wrestling on the ground." And then literally, the right overhand in the third round, it was a back and forth battle. And shout out to his opponent, I think it was Braden Simpson off the top of my head, one of Shane Parker's boys. And that was like a great fight. You know, you saw the momentum. You see the momentum swing back and forth, and it's like, that's so entertaining for people.
That's right. Exactly.
And so a fight like that, you know, both of those guys don't lose stock. Because if you're a Braden Simpson fan and you're one of his friends and family, you go, look, you still had a great fight.
Most definitely.
Right? And then if you're on Jacob's camp, then you go, wow, like what a fight, you know? And so that's why it's like, you know, I feel like there's room for all of that without the animosity. Right? Because the animosity is very much that's the old school way now, where it's like, you know, you want to hate the other guy.
Something I could never understand. Like literally, I've had 41 professional bouts all over Australia, and I can honestly say there's probably only one or two of those bouts where I just don't like the guy now. You know, and that's just because they just weren't nice people. You know, I've got some people I've gone to absolute war with, and there's some of my best friends, like Matt Kane. I've actually fought Matt twice, and buggers beat me both times. But the truth is, I look up to him as a mate now. Like if we catch up and have a good mate. Chat, which is important. You know, I've trained with, and I've you know, helped train. I've cornered guys. I've fought Ian Bone. I cornered him against his fight against Rob Whittaker, actually. So I was actually in his corner. Yet we fought a few years earlier. You know, so that's an important thing. The integrity within martial arts, I think, should still be maintained. I'm not a fan of the whole I have to hate the person. That doesn't show a skill set in my mind. Emotionally, martial arts should make you a strong person, so that you know that you can go into battle and take your emotion out of it. And when I see people, you know, be trying to use that emotion, to me it means there's a weakness there somewhere they're trying to cover. So ethical principles should always be in every battle. You know, and we've spoken about rule set. We'll work to the rule set. Be ethical in that. Don't cheat. You know, I've never poked anyone in the eye when I've fought, but it happens. You know, I've been conscious of it. Work within the skill set, which is such an important factor. It's a big thing to step into that cage, and a lot of people get emotional because of it. But it's something you've got to take away. You've got to be able to be calm in that storm. You know, and a lot of people forget that. As amateurs, I think the amateur circuit that we've got now is enabling people to feel that with a little bit less pressure. You know, my first fight, Warriors Room, as I said, was in Queensland. I was fighting a guy training in Queensland, even though he was American. So they come out, and there's always that Queensland banter about New South Wales. Matt Cain was one of their big prospects in Queensland. I come out to a chant of Queenslander. Yeah. You know, I'm walking out to this, 500-600 people, room of just Queensland, and I'm coming out to that. And that's the way it was quite regularly whenever we went up to Queensland to fight. It's exciting at the same time as, a bit nerve-wracking. You're wondering what you're going to get thrown at you type of thing. It was interesting, but it was very exciting times. After I lost to Matt Cain, I fought a guy named Shane Maincock, who was an Australian karate champion. I cleaned him up in the first round pretty quickly as well. And I actually had Shane Barmer come up to me and say, John, every time you fight, it's either an amazing fight or it's over too quickly. I want to see more amazing fights. And he actually tried to encourage me to not be super aggressive, which I now am a bit annoyed about. But he said, I'm paying you to be entertainment. And it actually affected the way I fought for a number of years, because I thought I have to go out there and fight a fight for the fans. It wasn't about me winning or losing. It was how the fight went. And it took me quite a while mentally to switch back to being the aggressive person I was initially when I stepped into that cage. And something which I talk to my guys now about, this is not about your friends and family in the crowd. You're not showing them your skills. Let's get this fight finished. And if you do it the right way, it's going to look beautiful anyway. Let's not be mugs about things. Let's use the skills that we've trained to go and do what we're supposed to do. So I try and get them to understand we need to finish fights.
That's a very interesting thing, because I think every athlete has to go through their own mental process. There are some guys that they feed off that negativity, and they love that, embrace that negative energy. Walking into enemy territory. The odds are against you. Everyone's against you. And some guys really feed off that, and they perform better as a result of that. And then there are other guys who crumble under that same circumstances, right? Where they go, people don't like me. Well, it's nothing personal.
No,
right?
It's just the environment.
It's just the environment, absolutely.
I've seen people crying backstage before they go out because they're that scared about stepping into that cage. And it is a daunting place to be, but if you love it, that's where you want to be. And again, be comfortable where everyone else is uncomfortable. That's what I really enjoy.
So your last fight was only like 4 years ago, wasn't it? 2019 was the last one, or
2019, just before the lockdowns. So
you stretched it out pretty long.
I'd fight again.
Would you?
If you gave me the right match, I'd step into that cage now.
Really?
Most definitely. I love it. I do. Again, it has to be the right match. I know I'm not sharp enough to be standing in there with the new breed. That they are a new breed, and I'm training them so I know what they're capable of. I'm just not as fit and as fast as I used to be, which is the things that you lose as you mature. You lose a little bit of that gas tank. You certainly lose that speed. I make up for it with
technical ability,
and just being a bit more cunning and wise about how I'm going to use my energy. I still spar my boys now. I roll them, most nights. I'm doing the MMA training with them. I'm wrestling with them, and we're strike sparring, we're MMA sparring, and I know I can still outwork them when I want to, because I take them to water they're not comfortable in, as the saying goes, and you just make smarter decisions. But I wouldn't pit myself against a 20 to 30-year-old guy who wants to make the UFC now. It's just not smart. They're going to clean me up. It's not worth the damage to me. But if you had someone else who was in their, early to mid 40s, 50s, whatever it might be, and they said they want to have a bit of a match for, bucket list tick off because they want to get back to it or something, I'd jump in. I'd have a go. I feel comfortable enough to know I'm capable of handling most people. And I still feel good there. So
no, that's exciting.
I enjoy it. But I was it was 4 years ago, so 2019. So just under 4 years ago. So I was 48 when I had my last match.
Wow.
It's been a while.
All right, let's talk a little bit about CFS and the starting of CFS. So you guys have been here for, what, 13, 14 years?
13, 14 years in this location. So I set CFS up originally in 99 as a PT venture. Okay. I knew banking wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to move into something which I enjoyed, which was the training.
Yep.
So I went and did my courses in becoming a PT, still working for the bank, and I had CFS running as a bit of a little bit extra income. At the same time, I was starting to do more security as well. So I had a few revenue streams coming into me, which was good. And then it was just a matter of, through the banking side of things, working into a position where I could get a redundancy. And that's what I actually did. I actually tactically moved myself to certain roles, which I knew I could eventually get a redundancy from. And I managed to pick one of those up in 2004. And as a result, I bought a lot of the equipment, which I actually have some of the equipment still here today, that I took that redundancy money and rather than invest, I probably should have invested in property, but I invested it in my business.
Yep.
And I set up a nice little personal training studio. It was 140 square meters of floor space. I had all my weights in there. Didn't have any mat area, so I couldn't really teach any classes. But at that stage, I was still teaching for Double Dragon.
Yep.
In the Kung Fu systems and their kids programs and so forth. So I was teaching there, and I basically was moving between the two places to earn some money. And it developed. I got to a stage where I thought I want to go a little bit bigger. I'd moved away from Double Dragon. As I said, I just didn't feel like it was helping me grow anymore.
Yep.
So I rented another place, which was about 250 square meters in size. I took all my weight gear, moved it, set up a mat area, got a big mat area, put some cage panels in, just to get that cage feel. And my whole vision was I wanted to build the place that I wanted to train at. Because in those days, and you'd be aware of this, I did my striking training at one gym, I did my grappling training at another gym, I do my wrestling training at another gym, I do some boxing training at another gym, I do my weight training at another gym. So I was traveling around while still working in a full-time job and doing my own PT work on the side and doing some security on the weekends. So you have to cover all these bases. And my thought was I need to build a place which I could do all this in one spot and then hopefully bring people to me so I could develop my skills better. And so that was the vision within that 250 square meters. But it became too small very quickly. And about 18 months into being in that place, this building became available, and it was an ex-motorcycle repair shop. It was dirty, had grease marks everywhere, it was messy. It's still an old factory, I'm aware of that, but at the same time, I saw a potential to grow here. Yeah. Now, it had been untenanted for a couple of months, and the real estate agent was probably not really ethical in his dealings with me about what I needed to do when I got in here. So I jumped on the chance of taking the place up, being a little bit naive as well, I suppose. And I got in here and started setting it up the way I wanted, and set up some mat area, and there's a large mezzanine up the top. And I was a bit sus on that, so I thought we needed to do some work there. And the real estate said he'd go and do the DA for me. I thought, great. And about 3 or 4 months went past, and I hadn't heard anything from the council. So I thought I'd go down to the council and have a look myself. Lodged. And there was no DA lodged, apparently. And so they said, well, look, you better get a DA lodged, otherwise you're not going to be able to rate business there. And I went, okay. So panicking a little bit, I've quickly filled out the paperwork and got it done, got it back to them. And then I got a call from the real estate, and he's going, you've lodged a DA with the council. I said, yeah, I had to. You said you were going to do it, and I thought I had to. And he's lost his shit at me, mate. Sorry, he's lost it at me completely. And so what's going on here? He says, you've just caused so many dramas, and the owner's going to be furious that they're going to have to change this and pay for that. And council guys come out, and apparently there hadn't been a DA in the building since the early 80s.
Wow.
So there was a lot that needed to be upgraded in order for the place just to be functional, useful. So I had to do a lot of changes. The upstairs mezzanine, which I thought would be a great place to train on, couldn't be used at all. It wasn't structurally sound. So I had to then go and invest in an engineer and do all the metal work, and I had a fairly good understanding about construction. My grandfather was actually quite a well-reputable builder for factories and houses and stuff like that. When I was growing up, I used to spend a lot of time at his warehouse, and I really enjoyed it, and I understand what needs to be done in relation to building things. So when I got the engineer in, he told me what I had to do, and I got a few of the boys in, and we did spend a couple of weekends fixing the place up to a stage where it was functional and operational. And the real estate hated me, and which was good. But we got the place up and running, and over the years I've just added things into the place. Like I always enjoyed the MMA as my main environment for training and fighting, but at the same time, a lot of the fights in those early days were also in rings. So I thought, if I'm going to have an elite level MMA training center, I need to have a ring, I need to have a cage. So I went and invested in both of those from America. Most of my weight gear, as I said, is still had from the original, but I've upgraded that since then. I've got all new cardio gear in the place, which I put in just before the second lockdown, which was fun. I just paid for it, and then they tell us we're locked down again. So that sat for a couple of months till that opened up. But yeah, I'm really proud of what I've created here. I've done it with a lot of help from family and friends, but I've invested the money myself. Everything's come from me. I've had opportunities through my career. People saying that, oh, look, I'll become a business partner with you. And I've always shied away from that because I'm not sure about how they would impact on my vision, on what I saw. And that vision has been in my head for a long time, and I've created this from that vision. I've actually got a vision to take it further. I could go through a whole vision that I can see of what I want to create, but that's all about money now, and
of course.
what financially I can afford to do, and this is where it's at the moment. Going to add a few more things in here shortly. I've got new mats going upstairs very shortly, and just taking it further. But it's my baby. It's what I love.
Fair enough.
So
let's talk a little bit about Train Alta.
Yes,
because I guess as a program, it's quite an interesting program. So it was formerly Winter Warrior.
Yes.
And then now it's sort of rebranded to Train Alta. And I think they've been going through like a few different iterations in terms of how they wanted to do things. But I noticed there was a bit of a promo that came out, and we're doing, there's like a east versus west, north versus south, suburban showdown. Yeah.
Yes. So Train Alta is a great program. I've got a big belief in the concepts that it can provide. Little backstory here. I remember discussing this concept with Richard Craney 2008, somewhere time around there, on a bus in between some weighing venues and so forth. And Richard actually went on to create Winter Warrior, which has then since been sold to create the Train Alta concept. But it was something which I feel like he was asking questions of me back then, and I had that connection to it.
Yep.
I didn't jump on it in the early days when it was run by Richard as the Winter Warrior program, simply because I was too busy creating my own CFS facility, and I was still fighting quite heavily myself. I was training athletes to become fighters. I was just training general population. I just didn't have time to endeavour in looking at something else. 2019, they approached me about running a Winter Warrior program here, starting in 2020, and I went, yeah, look, I'm right for that now. I've had my last fight as far as my wife's concerned, and look, I'm in the place with having enough staff and everything to do it, so I jumped on the venture. Unfortunately, we got 5 weeks in, and the first pandemic lockdown hit.
Yeah.
So that caused we actually had 40 odd people sign up for the very first one. It was huge.
Wow.
They hadn't had that many people sign up to a new program for a long time.
Yep.
So it was massive. But because of the pandemic and the uncertainty of the lockdown and everything, we only had 8 people get to want to finish it. There was a lot of uncertainty in society itself at that time. So what actually ended up happening is we ran a show here at the gym. So I actually got Synergy Martial Arts from Canberra to bring up some of their Winter Warrior competitors, because they couldn't run a show either. and we put on a show here in the gym.
Wow.
So we didn't give them a full show because no venues were available, nothing could be used. Places were open again, but it was just too much logistics behind actually running a show back then. So one of my coaches that I have here is Mark Christie, who is one of the best MMA referees in Australia. So he refereed all the bouts. We had a judging panel. We set up like a proper show.
Yep.
But it was just friends and family here watching, going through it, and it went really well. And when the second series started up again under the Whoop to Warrior banner, there wasn't as many people again. It was quite uncertain. So we had about 20 people sign up for that. We got through to the finish of the program, and then we had the event scheduled for 2 weeks later, and Sydney went down into its second lockdown. On the weekend, we had the event scheduled. So that got held off, and managed to keep a few of them still training, which was good. And we spoke to the Alta team because it had changed ownerships by this stage. And we organised that myself and my wife were going to run the show. So we set up a show, but we're going to take the show from about 4 other different places, and we'll put everyone together in one show. So we run the Winter Warrior show at Rosehill Racecourse, and I'm being a little bit biased here, but in my personal opinion, it was probably one of the best shows that I've personally been at. And it was an amazing event for these Winter Warrior Alta people to attend. I think it went really well, and as a result, it put a really good understanding into the Alta team to see what we were capable of as well as far as running a show.
Yep.
Now, I'd actually spoken to them. I'm not saying I had the idea, but I'd spoken to them about we need to do a series against series. Like they were trying to get a lot of different series up and running. Let's pit one. Like we could do a show amongst ourselves, but then maybe take the winners from that show and pit them with another series as winners type of thing. Try to create a bit of hype behind it type of thing. And they were, weren't keen on it at that stage. But Richie has Walsh come into the thing now, and he come up to me about 2 months ago and goes, "Look, we've got a new direction we're taking." I went, "Sweet." He goes, "We're going to do this suburban showdown. We're going to have 4 different gyms, train up 20 fighters, and we pit those gyms against each other." And I went, sensational. It's what I've been looking for all along. It's a great idea, Richie. Really good idea. Yeah, it is. I see it as a good way of moving forward with the program. So the Suburban Showdown is a concept where we take 20 athletes or 20 general population people and make them athletes is probably the better way to put it. More people can sign up, but it's going to be 20 people that we pick. So we might pick, 20 of the best, or we might pick 20 of the most charismatic. As we know, it's a marketing scheme these days behind any combat system. There's all the marketing going behind it, but that's what we're looking for, is those 20 people to build them up, and then they get to match off against someone from Penrith Way, someone from Manly Way, or someone from Inner West. And the Shire is the 4 that we've got running at the moment. I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a great concept. Sydney does have a lot of, north versus south, east versus west.
Yeah.
It's always been that way. In Australia in general, like as I said, early days of me fighting in Queensland, it was Queensland versus New South Wales. People really rally behind that. The state of origin is such a big thing. Even city versus country is still a big thing. Like having those separations.
Yeah.
Really,
we just want to find a tribe that we can resonate with and get behind. Find a team.
Yep, that's exactly right. So, we're looking forward to this. So, my current series is not actually started. It started before they brought out this Suburban Showdown, but I'm going to take these guys and put them into the Suburban Showdown. So, there's going to be a bit of a lag because they're going to finish before the other guys do.
Yep.
So I'm going to keep training them. But I've got a couple of other of my...
getting the head start, huh?
I've got a couple of other Winter Warrior athletes who are also still training with me now. They've seen that they enjoy this path, and they fought on the previous Winter Warrior and Alta shows. So we're going to keep them coming through and just put together a good little bunch of weapons.
Yeah.
Some good combative athletes.
Yeah, well, it's good for, it's always nice to be able to share the sport with more people.
Yep.
And sort of take away the stigma that it's something that's just so brutal or violent. Yeah, look, it can be violent. Yes, it can absolutely be brutal,
Yep.
But there's something about that just makes it so, I don't know what's the right word, but like you just, there's something very human about it.
Very primal.
Yeah, it's very primal.
Yeah, it's very accurate. Like, I actually saw a meme yesterday, and it was like, it was from a comedy movie, and it's this guy saying, "Oh, like I'm an athlete too. I'm preparing for a triathlon. I go for my swimming, I go for my run, and I do this." And then the other guy's going, "Well, I'm a real athlete. We have to wrestle and fight and do that." There's again no disrespect for CrossFitters or triathletes or any other sport that you're doing. That they are sports, and you want to be the best at them. So appreciate it. It's great. But to be a combat athlete is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, because you don't only have to have the physical attributes, you don't only have to have the skill set involved, you also have a mental game, which is like a game of chess. You have to be mentally prepared to pit your body against somebody else's, where sometimes you're going to have to receive damage. You're going to have to give them openings in order to maximize your potential openings. So there's that. Okay, well, here's my pawn, so I can get my bishop out. Here's this. I've got to give certain things away, and there's going to be wins and losses from that. And the mental application is quite a challenge. So this Train Alta program is stuff that we go through. That we're preparing people for the ability to fight. We don't want them to be fighting in the street. We want them to be fighting in an environment which is controlled and safe. And the matches are, as you're aware, C-class MMA. So they're padded. They're quite well, shin guards, mouthpieces, groin guards, thicker gloves. They're also, the referees are aware that if this match is not looking pretty, they'll stop it.
Yeah.
So it's quite a safe environment, but it still gives them that buzz, that thrill of being in there, pitting what they've learnt against somebody else who knows something similar. Let's see how we go.
In front of their friends and family, in front of the crowd.
It's a sensational environment. It's a really good concept. I hopefully more people can try it, because it's something everyone should try and experience. Like a lot of people go through life not knowing what they're capable of. Let's try and find that.
Yeah. So. All right. Couple of more things, and then I think that'll be it for us today.
Forever.
The logo. So obviously I can see the two dragons on the logo. So that's obviously a bit of a harkening back to Jimilkin days, correct?
Yes, very much so. So there's two dragons in my logo. If you have a very effective eye and you remember gaming back in the day.
Double dragon?
Almost.
Yeah.
Similar concept. The dragons are actually the Mortal Kombat.
Ah, okay, they're the Mortal Kombat dragons.
Mortal Kombat dragons.
Okay.
So that's where I've hopefully not taken any legal
Copyright
rights from this, but they have been changed sufficiently.
We'll say they're inspired
by the Mortal Kombat. So I didn't do a lot of gaming when I was young, but because gaming really only started towards the end of my teens and young adult life. I did play my Ataris and my Commodore 64s and 128s and early Xbox and Nintendos, and Mortal Kombat was, you had to fight.
Yep.
Fight to the death. That's something which I suppose it resonated with me. So
yeah, fair.
That's where it come from.
All right. And then one thing that I always like
I'll just put one other thing in that.
Yep.
You'll also notice there's actually the yin yang logo in there as well, because I'm a big believer that we are all equal. Okay, males, females, we're equal. It's where our strengths lie. Yeah. And having that understanding about where your strengths lies is such an important thing. So that traditional Chinese concept of yin and yang, I think it applies to everything we should apply in life. You're going to be strong sometimes, but you're also going to be weak in others. And knowing how to flow through that is an important aspect as well. So
just on that, I guess, having been exposed to that Eastern sort of philosophy as well as growing up in a Western country, where does that put you mentally in terms of, like, I guess, religion and things like that, like spirituality? How do you approach that aspect of life?
That's an interesting concept, because yes, Western society they've got their religious structure. And And I've always actually felt like I don't fit into that religious structure. And I don't believe the narrative provided within it. If I'm a bit of a study of history and minor philosophy, I suppose. It's not really, I'm not a big philosopher, but I understand it. And history was something I really like to look at. And that is something which I come through the martial arts training as well, I suppose. You've got to understand history to understand martial arts. But yeah, a lot of the Western concepts of religion didn't gel with me. And I was exposed to the Buddhist systems and the beliefs there as well. And I could see the fundamentals within both, but I could also more resonating towards that Buddhist belief, be a good person, treat people the right way, be honourable, be respectful. I think that is the way I approach life. I wouldn't say I have any particular religious beliefs myself, but at the same time, be a good person. Treat others as you want to be treated yourself.
Yeah.
And they actually have, that applies to most religions.
Yeah, it does.
I just see a lot of hate and animosity which comes from some religions, and unfortunately I don't because that doesn't apply to that concept at all.
Yeah.
So not structurally a religious person myself. My children are growing up in a Catholic household because that's my wife's side of things, but at the same time, my boy will come home and he'll talk about the religion that he learns at school, and I can't say anything to him at this point in time, but there will be coming a time when I'll explain to him my beliefs as such as well, because I don't see them as fundamentally sound from a historical point of view.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. I always find that question to be very interesting because whatever somebody's beliefs may be at any particular point in time, they change over the years as well. As you get influenced by whether it's your own experiences, whether it's experience that somebody else has had. Yep. These things can have an impact. It's interesting that you mentioned, your wife is a Catholic. Mine is as well.
Yep.
And her influence has been, creeping into my life.
Yes.
More and more over the years and things like that. So, I guess for me, like where I'm sort of at is I do believe that there is a God, so to speak.
Yes.
But, I don't know the name of this God.
No.
So whether it's, because obviously if the name of the God is Jesus, then there's certain implications about that. If you believe, that God is Allah, then there's certain implications for that as well. Yep. Or if you think that, there's a Buddhist God, so to speak.
That's right.
And I think one of the misconceptions about Buddhism is that, people might think that Buddhism is polytheistic, where like all of these Buddhas are gods. That's not actually the case. No. I think you'd probably have to view them more like saints, so to speak. They're just people that have found a specific form of enlightenment.
That's right.
To get to that level. But I always find that, it's very interesting, especially, so for me, I grew up with a lot of those Buddhist ideologies, and especially through martial arts, Kung Fu especially, you get exposed to these different lenses in terms of how to view the world from that perspective. Yep. But across, I think, most cultures, there is some form of commonality in terms of like, what does it mean to be a good person?
Yep.
And I think, those things are grounded in trying to differentiate us from, the average animal, right? The average
Most
beast.
Definitely. Yep.
And it's funny because I feel like we live in this world now where people love to say, oh, like these things, we're animals as well, right? It's like, oh, look, you gotta be careful about how you say that, because if you think that, human beings, we're supposed to be like animals, well, if I go and eat, another woman's child to try and put her into estrus so that I can have her babies,
it's a little bit extreme.
It's a little bit extreme, right?
A little bit extreme.
So you got to be careful what you wish for, right? Like,
most definitely, and that's a big factor. Look, we can't. We're not animals. We've certainly moved beyond
a higher consciousness.
Than consciousness at this point in time. Now, that could also, some animals obviously are on similar planes. I'm a firm believer that we don't know enough about a lot of these species which we're randomly killing at our own leisure, so to speak. But humanity itself is taking ourselves. We've populated the earth to such a great extent. We've become the dominant presence, and in the nature of things, the strongest survive. It's actually something which I say, only the strong survive, is one of the logos I use on my clothing and so forth. And that's basically what humanity has done. We've become the strongest, so we're the ones surviving. Whether the earth kicks our ass at some point in time and says, no, you're not the strongest anymore, we'll wait and see. But at the end of the day, that is what we are as humans. We've built that. We've got to make sure we maintain that, which is the main thing, because I feel that if we allow ourselves to become weak and soft, then we're going to go backwards.
Yeah.
And again, being a bit of a study of history, you can look at multiple societies throughout the dawn of time which have built up to certain levels of knowledge, and then they've vanished. So that's something which I hope we're smart enough to avoid in the near future anyway, but it's certainly something we've got to worry about. And the religion comes with those societies as well. A lot of the different religions, they've all got very similar concepts involved in them. And you can look at one thing, and then if you change its name, it becomes this other thing in another religion. There's those concepts that cross over. So I like talking about history like this. It gets you thinking. But yeah, my firm belief is that we've got a society now which the Earth's been around for 6 to 8 billion years or whatever they think it is.
Yeah.
Who's to say we're not the 15th humanoid race that's been here? It's just that they've been wiped out through a million years of evolution, and then there's been a million years where nothing happened, and then there's a million years where we're back again. And over 6 to 8 billion years, that's a lot of time for things to come and go.
Extremely long period of time.
That's right. So we get very narrow-sighted in a lot of things in life. Again, we look at the short term, and realistically, if you look at more of a long-term view, a lot of the things that we worry about now become very insignificant.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I think that's a great way to draw this podcast to a close.
Philosophy there.
Yeah, a bit of philosophy for everyone. If people want to find you guys, it's at Customised Fitness Solutions.
At teamcfs.com.au.
There you go.
That's the website. There's also an Instagram page, Team CFS. Come down anytime. My door is always open. I'm here way too much, according to my wife. So you can come in anytime. There's classes on during the day. There's classes on at night. The gym runs from 5 a.m. in the morning till 9:30 at night. So you can walk in nearly any time. You'll be able to see what we do here. The gym's here. There's a sauna here. Jump in and have a play. Free classes. Come in and enjoy yourself. My idea is to give this to as many people as I know who want to become a better person for themselves.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that today, Jon. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.